Hello there, and welcome. Tonight I want to take you somewhere extraordinary, somewhere that exists in the quiet space between waking and sleeping, between what we know and what we can only imagine. I want to take you to a moment that has never happened, and perhaps never will, yet feels strangely familiar when we close our eyes and let our minds wander. Tonight, we're going to explore together what it might be like if time itself decided to take a pause, to rest for just a while, stopping everything in the universe except for one remarkable thing: your thoughts, your awareness, your consciousness continuing its gentle journey while everything else falls perfectly, peacefully still. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Time doesn't just stop. The universe doesn't simply pause like a video we're watching late at night. And yet, there's something deeply calming about imagining it. Something that speaks to a part of us that has always wondered about the nature of time itself. Perhaps you've had moments, we all have, where time seemed to slow down or speed up, where a single second stretched into what felt like minutes, or where hours passed in what seemed like the blink of an eye. These experiences hint at something profound about the relationship between our consciousness and the flow of time, something that scientists are only beginning to understand and that philosophers have pondered for millennia. Before we drift deeper into this thought experiment, into this gentle exploration of a universe at rest, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked into bed in a busy city where the lights never quite go out? Are you in a quiet suburban home where the only sounds are the occasional car passing by? Perhaps you're in the countryside where the night is so dark and quiet that you can hear your own heartbeat. Whatever corner of our beautiful planet you're in, whatever time zone cradles you right now, whether it's late evening, the deep middle of the night, or those precious early morning hours before dawn, you're part of this journey we're taking together. And if you're finding comfort in these words, if this exploration speaks to something in you, I gently invite you to like this video, to subscribe if you haven't already, and perhaps to share it with someone who might also appreciate a peaceful journey through the cosmos of imagination. These small connections we make, these tiny digital threads that link us across space and time, they matter more than we might think. They create a web of shared wonder, a community of gentle explorers who aren't afraid to ask the big questions, even if we know we might never find definitive answers. The clock on your wall, or perhaps the digital display on your phone if you peek at it, shows a specific time right now. Maybe it's 10:47 p.m. or 2:23 a.m. or some other configuration of numbers that marks this particular moment in your life. That clock is doing what clocks do, measuring the passage of time, counting the seconds and minutes and hours as they flow past like water in a stream. But what if, just for tonight, just in our imagination, that clock stopped? Not broken, not paused by a power outage, but stopped because time itself decided to hold its breath. The second hand frozen between one tick and the next, digital numbers caught in mid-change, and not just your clock, but every clock, every timepiece, every temporal marker in the entire universe, all falling silent at exactly the same moment. Yet here you are, still thinking, still aware, still following these words as they unfold in your mind. Your thoughts haven't stopped. Your consciousness continues its gentle movement through ideas and images and feelings. You are, in this imaginary scenario, the only thing in the entire cosmos that continues to experience change, to move from one moment to the next, while everything else rests in perfect, absolute stillness. It's a paradox, isn't it? How can your thoughts move through time if time itself has stopped? How can you experience a next thought if there is no next moment? These are the kinds of questions that make this thought experiment so fascinating, so rich with possibility, and yet so soothing in its impossibility. Let me paint you a picture of how this might begin, how this extraordinary event might unfold in the quiet sanctuary of your own room. You're lying there, perhaps much as you are right now, comfortable and warm, your body finding that perfect position where every muscle can finally relax. The familiar sounds of your space surround you, maybe the gentle hum of an air conditioner or heater, the distant murmur of traffic, the settling of your house or apartment as it cools in the night, the rhythmic breathing of a pet or partner nearby. These sounds create a kind of sonic blanket, a familiar comfort that tells you all is well, that the world is continuing its ancient patterns while you prepare to rest. And then, without warning, without fanfare, without any dramatic shift or cosmic announcement, everything simply stops. The hum cuts off mid-vibration. The settling of the house freezes mid-creak. If there's a curtain stirring in a breeze from an open window, it halts mid-flutter, hanging in space like a photograph of fabric caught in motion. If there's a glass of water on your nightstand with the surface slightly disturbed, those tiny ripples freeze into perfect motionless circles, like someone has turned the water into the most delicate crystal sculpture. The very air around you, usually in constant if imperceptible motion, becomes absolutely still. Dust motes that were drifting through a shaft of moonlight pause in their lazy descent, becoming tiny planets suspended in the silver glow. But you're still here, still aware, still able to observe this impossible stillness. Your thoughts haven't frozen, your consciousness hasn't crystallized. You can still move from one idea to the next, still feel the gentle flow of awareness that makes you who you are. In fact, you might notice that your thoughts feel somehow clearer, more spacious, as if the stopping of external time has given your internal experience more room to breathe, more space to unfold. Without the constant tick of clocks, without the subtle pressure of time passing, your mind finds a new kind of rhythm, a different way of being. This is where our journey really begins, in this impossible moment, in this gentle paradox of a universe at rest with a mind still in motion. And I want to be clear, this isn't a story about danger or fear or cosmic catastrophe. There's no threat here, no emergency, no need for alarm. This is a thought experiment wrapped in wonder, a philosophical question dressed in the clothes of imagination. We're exploring this idea not because it could happen, but because thinking about it, imagining it, letting our minds play with the possibility, reveals something beautiful about the nature of consciousness, about the mystery of time, about our place in the vast, extraordinary cosmos. Scientists have long puzzled over the nature of time. Is it fundamental to the universe, woven into the very fabric of reality? Or is it emergent, something that arises from other, more basic processes? Einstein showed us that time isn't absolute. It can stretch and compress, flow at different rates depending on gravity and motion. Quantum physicists have found situations where the normal rules of cause and effect seem to blur, where the arrow of time becomes strangely flexible. And neuroscientists studying consciousness have discovered that our perception of time is far more complex and mysterious than we might have thought. The brain doesn't have a single clock ticking away the seconds. Instead, it has multiple systems for tracking different aspects of temporal experience, and these can sometimes disagree, creating those strange moments where time seems to slow down in a crisis or speed up when we're absorbed in something we love. In our thought experiment, we're taking all of this scientific wonder and pushing it to a gentle extreme. We're asking, what if there was a complete separation between physical time, the time that governs atoms and planets and galaxies, and psychological time, the time that exists in consciousness, in awareness, in the flow of thought? What if these two types of time, usually so intimately connected that we can't tell them apart, suddenly went their separate ways? Physical time stops, freezes, pauses completely. But psychological time, the time of your thoughts and feelings and observations, continues on its gentle journey. Think about what this means for the light in your room right now. Light, as we understand it, is always in motion. It travels at exactly 209,792,458 meters per second in a vacuum, a speed so fundamental to the universe that it's built into the very equations that describe reality. But if time has stopped, then light has stopped too. Those photons that were bouncing off the walls, off your furniture, off the pages of a book or the screen of your phone, they're all frozen in place. The room should be in absolute darkness, shouldn't it? And yet, in our imagination, in this gentle impossibility we're exploring, you can still see. Perhaps your consciousness, moving through its own time, can somehow still perceive the frozen light, can still interpret those motionless photons. Or perhaps, in this strange state, your awareness generates its own kind of illumination, a light that exists only in consciousness, only in thought. This isn't meant to be scientifically accurate. We're not trying to write equations or propose a new theory of physics. We're exploring, we're wondering, we're letting our minds wander through possibilities that exist in the space between science and dreams. And there's something deeply peaceful about this kind of exploration, something that speaks to a very human need to imagine, to wonder, to ask, what if, without needing a definitive answer. As you lie there in your bed, in this imagined moment of universal pause, you might notice things you've never noticed before. That plant on your windowsill, usually gently swaying in imperceptible air currents, now reveals its exact shape, every leaf positioned in a specific way that you've never quite seen. The shadow it casts, usually shifting subtly as time passes, now forms a precise pattern on the wall, like a delicate piece of art that was always there but never still enough to truly observe. The folds in your blanket, usually shifting as you breathe and move, now create a landscape of fabric, hills and valleys of cotton or wool that tell the story of how you settled into bed. Even your own body, usually in constant if subtle motion, breathing, pulse, tiny adjustments of position, has become still. And yet, you're still aware of it. You can still feel the weight of your body on the mattress, the warmth of the blankets, the soft embrace of your pillow. These sensations persist in your consciousness, even though the physical processes that usually create them have paused. It's as if your awareness has become a kind of recording, playing back the sensations of the moment when time stopped, or perhaps generating them anew from memory and expectation. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of consciousness itself. We usually think of awareness as something that emerges from physical processes, neurons firing, chemicals transmitting signals, electrical patterns flowing through the brain. But in our thought experiment, with physical processes frozen, consciousness continues. What does this tell us about the relationship between mind and matter, between awareness and the physical substrate that usually supports it? These are questions that philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and while we're not going to solve them tonight, we can explore them, play with them, let them add depth and richness to our imaginative journey. As you continue to observe your frozen room, you might start to wonder about the world beyond your walls. What has happened to your neighbours, your city, your country, the entire planet? Are they all frozen too, caught in whatever they were doing at the exact moment time stopped? The thought is both strange and strangely comforting. Everyone, everywhere is taking a pause. All the rush and hurry and stress of daily life has been gently set aside. The businessman hurrying to catch a train is frozen mid-stride. The child playing in a park on the other side of the world is suspended mid-laugh. The baker pulling fresh bread from an oven is paused in that moment of satisfaction. Everyone, everywhere, is resting, even if they don't know it. And what about nature? The waves on every ocean have become sculptures of water, their foam and spray hanging in the air like delicate lace. Waterfalls have transformed into columns of crystal, every droplet visible and distinct. Clouds have become paintings in the sky, their shapes no longer morphing and changing but fixed in whatever form they had achieved at the moment of the pause. Birds are suspended in flight, their wings spread in perfect demonstration of the aerodynamics that usually keep them aloft. Insects hover motionless in the air, their rapidly beating wings finally still enough to see clearly. This frozen world isn't frightening or apocalyptic. It's peaceful, serene, almost like the universe is taking a deep breath and holding it, not in tension but in a kind of cosmic meditation, and you, with your still-moving consciousness, are the sole witness to this extraordinary moment. You're like someone who has been given exclusive access to the world's most incredible museum, where every exhibit is the entire universe, frozen in a single instant of its existence. But let's think about this a little differently. What if this pause in time isn't something that happens to the universe, but something that happens to you? What if your consciousness has somehow stepped outside the normal flow of time, found a quiet eddy in the stream where it can rest and observe while everything else continues flowing past? From the universe's perspective, no time has passed at all. The pause exists only in your experience, a gift of expanded awareness that allows you to examine a single moment with infinite patience and attention. This idea connects to something many contemplative traditions have explored, the notion of the eternal now, the present moment expanded to contain all of experience. Meditation teachers often speak of finding stillness within motion, of discovering a place of quiet observation even as life continues its busy dance around us. In our thought experiment, we're taking this metaphor and making it literal. We're imagining what it would be like to actually step outside time's flow, to find that still point from which everything else can be observed. As you continue to explore this frozen moment, you might begin to notice layers of detail you've never seen before. The texture of your walls, usually just a background to your life, reveals tiny patterns and imperfections that tell the story of the building's construction and age. The books on your shelf, if you have them, stand like silent guardians of knowledge, their spines creating a colourful barcode of all the stories and ideas you've collected over the years. Even the air itself, usually invisible, might seem to have a quality, a presence, now that it's no longer in motion. And what about memories? In this timeless moment, do your memories still flow? Can you still recall yesterday, last week, last year? Or are they too frozen, fixed like photographs in the album of your mind? Perhaps memories exist in a different kind of time, a psychological time that continues even when physical time has stopped. You might find yourself able to revisit any moment from your past with perfect clarity, as if the stopping of external time has somehow made your internal timeline more accessible, more vivid. This connects to how neuroscientists understand memory, not as fixed recordings, but as dynamic reconstructions, rebuilt each time we recall them. In our frozen moment, with no new input from the external world, your consciousness might turn inward, exploring the vast landscape of memory and imagination with new freedom and clarity. Every person you've known, every place you've been, every experience that has shaped you, they're all still there, still accessible, still part of the flowing river of your consciousness, even as the external world remains perfectly still. The more we explore this idea, the more we realize that consciousness and time are intimately connected in ways we don't fully understand. Your awareness seems to create its own time, its own sequence of moments, independent of the cosmic clockwork that usually surrounds us. This isn't just philosophical speculation. There's real science that suggests consciousness might play a fundamental role in the nature of time itself. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness is necessary to collapse quantum possibilities into definite realities. Some theories of time suggest that the now moment, the present that we all experience, might be created by consciousness rather than being a fundamental feature of physics. But we don't need to resolve these deep questions tonight. We're here to explore, to wonder, to let our minds play with possibilities, and there's something deeply restful about this kind of open-ended contemplation, this gentle wondering that doesn't demand answers or conclusions. In a world that often feels urgently focused on the next moment, the next task, the next achievement, there's profound peace in imagining a pause, a rest, a moment expanded to contain all the contemplation we might ever need. As you lie in your bed, in this imagined stillness, you might feel a sense of profound gratitude beginning to emerge. Gratitude for consciousness itself, for this mysterious ability to be aware, to experience, to witness the universe from your unique perspective. Usually we're so caught up in the content of our thoughts, worrying about tomorrow, replaying yesterday, planning and remembering and anticipating, that we rarely appreciate the miracle of thinking itself. But here, in this frozen moment, with nowhere to go and nothing urgent to do, you can simply marvel at the fact that you can marvel, wonder at the fact that you can wonder. This gratitude might extend to the frozen world around you. Every object in your room, motionless though it may be, represents a story, a connection, a piece of the life you've built. That chair might be where you sit to read or work or simply think. That photograph, if you have one visible, captures a moment that was precious enough to preserve. That window, even with its view frozen in time, represents your connection to the wider world, your place in the grand tapestry of existence. All of these things, usually just background to your daily life, become somehow more present, more significant, when caught in this imaginary pause. And what about your body itself? Usually we're barely aware of it unless something hurts or feels particularly good. But now, with physical processes paused, you might become aware of your body in a new way. Not as a collection of moving parts, not as a biological machine requiring constant maintenance, but as the physical home of your consciousness, the vessel that has carried you through every moment of your life. Every scar tells a story. Every line and wrinkle maps a journey. Your hands, even frozen, hold the history of everything they've touched, created, and expressed. This brings us to an interesting paradox in our thought experiment. If your body is frozen in time like everything else, how is your consciousness still functioning? Where exactly is the you that's doing the observing? Are you somehow separate from your physical form, a ghost in a machine that has temporarily stopped? Or is consciousness something that transcends the physical, something that exists in a realm beyond the reach of time's pause? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's part of what makes them so fascinating to explore. Some spiritual traditions speak of consciousness as something that exists beyond the physical body, something that uses the brain and nervous system as instruments, but isn't confined to them. Science, generally, sees consciousness as emerging from physical processes, though exactly how this happens remains one of the greatest mysteries in all of human knowledge. In our thought experiment, we're playing with both possibilities, imagining a scenario where consciousness can somehow continue even when its usual physical substrate has paused. This might sound far-fetched, but consider your dreams. Every night when you sleep, your consciousness creates entire worlds, complete with people, places, and experiences that feel completely real while you're in them. Your sleeping brain generates these experiences with minimal input from the external world. In a sense, dream consciousness exists in its own time, following its own rules, creating its own reality. Perhaps what we're imagining tonight, consciousness continuing while physical time stops, isn't so different from what happens every night when you dream. As we near the end of this first chapter of our journey, I want to return to something I mentioned at the beginning. This exploration we're undertaking together, this gentle journey through an impossible scenario, it's not about finding answers or proving theories. It's about the joy of wondering, the peace of contemplation, the deep human pleasure of asking what if, and following that question wherever it might lead. In a universe that often seems too vast to comprehend, too complex to fully understand, there's something comforting about creating our own thought experiment, our own gentle impossibility that we can explore at our own pace. The clock on your wall, in our imagination, is still frozen. The second hand still hasn't completed its next tick. The digital display still hasn't changed, and yet you've already travelled through so many thoughts, so many ideas, so many possibilities. This itself tells us something profound about consciousness, that our inner experience of time is far richer, far more complex than any clock could ever measure. A single second of clock time can contain an infinity of thoughts. A lifetime of experiences can flash through consciousness in a moment, and sometimes, like now, we can stretch a simple idea into a vast exploration that seems to exist outside of normal time altogether. As we prepare to move deeper into this thought experiment, to explore what lies beyond your room and out in the wider world, I want you to remember that you're safe here. This is a journey of imagination, not danger, an exploration of wonder, not fear. The universe we're imagining, frozen in time except for your thoughts, is a peaceful place, a quiet sanctuary where consciousness can explore without urgency or pressure. There's no need to rush through these ideas, no deadline to meet, no test at the end. We're simply wandering together through the landscape of possibility, taking our time, or perhaps existing outside of time, as we explore what it might mean for everything to pause except awareness itself. The night outside your window, frozen though it may be in our imagination, holds countless wonders waiting to be discovered. The stars caught mid-twinkle, the moon paused in its eternal dance around our planet, the vast cosmos usually in constant motion, now offering a perfect stillness for contemplation. Your consciousness, the only moving thing in a universe at rest, is about to embark on a journey that will take us from the intimacy of your room to the infinite reaches of space, from the microscopic to the cosmic, from the known to the mysteriously unknown. But that journey continues in our next movement through this frozen symphony of time and thought. For now, rest in this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment where time has stopped for everything except your beautiful, wandering consciousness. Feel the peace of it, the spaciousness of it, the gentle impossibility that makes it safe to explore, safe to wonder, safe to simply be aware in a universe that has decided just for now, just for you, to take a perfect, eternal pause. Before we venture further into our frozen universe, before we explore what lies beyond your room, where time has paused for everything except your thoughts, let's take a gentle step back and consider what time actually means in the world we normally inhabit. Time is such a constant companion in our lives that we rarely stop to think about what it really is, how it works, or why it seems to flow in only one direction. We measure it, save it, spend it, waste it. And yet if someone asked you to explain what time actually is, you might find yourself at a loss for words. It's one of those fundamental aspects of reality that we all experience but struggle to define, like trying to explain the colour blue to someone who has never seen, or describing the taste of water to someone who has never drunk. In your daily life, time probably feels like a steady river flowing from past through present into future. You wake up in the morning, or perhaps in the afternoon if you work nights or enjoy sleeping in, and immediately, almost unconsciously, you orient yourself in time. What day is it? What time is it? What do I need to do today? These questions anchor you in the temporal flow, give structure to your experience, help you navigate through the hours and days and years of your life. The alarm clock that woke you, the schedule you follow, the deadlines you meet or miss, the appointments you keep, all of these are markers in time's river, little buoys that help you navigate the current. But even in ordinary life, time isn't quite as simple or uniform as our clocks and calendars suggest. Think about how differently time feels in different situations. When you're doing something you love, absorbed in a hobby or deep in conversation with someone special, hours can pass in what feels like minutes. The afternoon disappears, evening arrives unexpectedly, and you wonder where the time went. But when you're waiting for something, sitting in a doctor's office, standing in a slow-moving line, watching the clock during a boring meeting, minutes can feel like hours. Each second drags by with agonizing slowness, and you become acutely aware of time's passage in a way that feels almost oppressive. These subjective experiences of time hint at something profound, that consciousness and time are more intimately connected than we might think. Your brain doesn't have a single master clock ticking away the seconds. Instead, it has multiple systems for tracking time, and these can sometimes disagree or be influenced by your emotional state, your level of attention, even your body temperature. When you have a fever, time often feels distorted. When you're in danger, people often report that time seems to slow down, allowing them to perceive and react to things with unusual clarity. These aren't just illusions or mistakes, they're windows into the complex relationship between consciousness and temporal experience. Scientists have discovered that different parts of your brain track different aspects of time. Your circadian rhythms, controlled by a tiny cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, keep track of the daily cycle of light and dark, telling your body when to feel sleepy or alert. Your cerebellum helps time your movements, allowing you to catch a ball or play a musical instrument. Your hippocampus helps you remember when things happened, placing memories in temporal order, and your prefrontal cortex helps you plan for the future, imagining tomorrow and next week and next year. All of these systems work together to create your seamless experience of flowing time, but they can also work independently, which is why you can lose track of clock time while still maintaining perfect rhythm in a dance or a song. But let's zoom out from the personal experience of time to consider how physics understands it. In Newton's universe, the one most of us intuitively inhabit, time was absolute and universal. There was imagined to be a great cosmic clock ticking away the same seconds everywhere in the universe simultaneously. If it was 3:42 p.m. on Earth, it was the same moment on Mars, on Alpha Centauri, in the Andromeda Galaxy. Time was like a stage on which the drama of the universe played out, unchanging and unchangeable, flowing at the same rate for everyone and everything. Then Einstein came along and showed us that time is far stranger than Newton imagined. In Einstein's universe, time and space are woven together into a four-dimensional fabric called space-time. Mass and energy can bend this fabric, and motion through space affects motion through time. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. The stronger the gravity you experience, the slower time flows for you. These aren't just theoretical ideas, they're real effects that have been measured and confirmed countless times. The GPS satellites orbiting Earth have to account for the fact that time runs slightly faster for them, high above Earth's gravitational field, than it does for us on the surface. Without correcting for this time dilation, GPS would accumulate errors of about 10 kilometers per day. This means that there is no universal now that exists everywhere in the universe simultaneously. What counts as now depends on where you are and how you're moving. For someone traveling at high speed relative to you, your future might be their present, or your past might be their future. It's not that one of you is right and the other wrong, you're both right from your own perspectives. Time, it turns out, is relative, personal, dependent on your particular path through space-time. This relativity of time becomes even more extreme near massive objects like black holes. If you were to approach a black hole, time would slow down for you relative to someone watching from a safe distance. From their perspective, you would appear to move slower and slower as you got closer to the event horizon, eventually seeming to freeze in time at the boundary beyond which light cannot escape. But from your perspective, time would continue flowing normally. You would pass through the event horizon in what feels like ordinary time, even as the outside universe appears to speed up, stars living and dying in what seems like moments. These exotic scenarios might seem far removed from our thought experiment of time stopping except for consciousness, but they show us that time is far more flexible, far more mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. If time can slow down, speed up, and flow at different rates for different observers, then perhaps the idea of it stopping entirely, at least from one perspective, isn't as impossible as it might initially seem. But physics has even stranger things to say about time. In the equations of fundamental physics, there's nothing that says time has to flow in one direction rather than another. Most physical processes are reversible. If you filmed them and played the film backwards, they would still obey the laws of physics. A planet could orbit a star clockwise or counterclockwise. Particles could collide and bounce apart or fly together and collide. The equations don't care about the direction of time. So why does time seem to have such a clear direction in our experience? Why do we remember the past but not the future? Why does cause come before effect? Why do we age rather than getting younger? The answer seems to be connected to something called entropy, a measure of disorder in a system. The second law of thermodynamics says that in any isolated system, entropy tends to increase over time. Things tend to become more disordered, more random, more spread out. It's why your coffee cools down rather than spontaneously heating up, why rooms get messy rather than spontaneously organizing themselves, why we can scramble an egg but can't unscramble it. This increase in entropy might be what gives time its apparent direction, its arrow pointing from past to future. The universe started in a very low entropy state, the Big Bang, and has been increasing in entropy ever since. We experience this increase as the flow of time, the movement from order to disorder, from potential to actualization. But this raises a fascinating question. If entropy were to stop increasing, if the universe reached maximum entropy, or somehow reset to a low entropy state, would our perception of time change? Would time seem to stop or reverse or flow differently? In our thought experiment, where time has stopped for everything except consciousness, we might imagine that entropy has paused too. Every particle is frozen in place, unable to contribute to the universe's gradual slide toward disorder. The coffee in a cup neither cools nor warms. The cream swirled into it neither mixes further nor unmixes. Everything is caught in a moment of perfect suspension, entropy held in check by time's pause, and yet your thoughts continue, which means that in some sense entropy continues in your consciousness even as it stops everywhere else. Your thoughts still flow from one to the next, information still processes, memories still form, or do they? This brings us to one of the deepest mysteries in all of science, the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical processes. Most scientists believe that consciousness emerges from the complex interactions of neurons in the brain. These interactions involve the movement of ions across cell membranes, the release and reception of neurotransmitters, the propagation of electrical signals along axons. All of these are physical processes that require time to unfold. If time stopped, these processes would stop too, and presumably consciousness would cease. But what if consciousness is something more than just neural activity? What if, as some philosophers and even some scientists suggest, consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, like mass or charge or spin? This idea, sometimes called panpsychism, suggests that everything might have some form of consciousness or proto-consciousness, and that human consciousness is just a particularly complex and organized form of this universal property. If consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, then perhaps it could continue even when physical processes pause. Or consider another possibility. What if consciousness exists in its own kind of time, separate from but usually synchronized with physical time? We know that subjective time can differ from clock time. We know that dreams can seem to last for hours or days while only minutes pass in the external world. We know that some meditation practitioners report experiences of timelessness, of stepping outside the normal flow of moments. Perhaps consciousness naturally exists in its own temporal dimension, and it's only our assumption, our habit, that keeps it synchronized with physical time. When physical time stops in our thought experiment, conscious time continues, like two dancers who have been moving in perfect harmony, suddenly finding one frozen, while the other continues the dance alone. These ideas might sound abstract, but they connect to very real experiences you've probably had. Have you ever been so absorbed in a book that you lost all track of time, only to look up and discover that hours have passed? In those moments, your consciousness was creating its own temporal flow, independent of the clock on the wall. Have you ever had a dream that felt like it lasted for days or even years, entire lifetimes of experience compressed into a few minutes of REM sleep? Your brain was generating its own time, its own sequence of causes and effects, its own past, present, future structure. Or think about memory itself. When you remember something vividly, you're not just recalling information, you're re-experiencing a piece of the past. That moment, which no longer exists in physical time, still exists in your consciousness. You can revisit it, examine it, sometimes even seem to notice new details you missed the first time. In a very real sense, consciousness allows you to time travel, to move backward through your personal history even as physical time carries you relentlessly forward. And what about imagination, planning, anticipation? When you imagine tomorrow's important meeting or next summer's vacation, you're projecting consciousness into the future, experiencing events that haven't happened yet and might never happen exactly as you imagine them. This ability to mental time travel, to exist simultaneously in the present while exploring the past and future, is one of the most remarkable features of human consciousness. It suggests that our relationship with time is far more complex and flexible than we usually realize. In the field of neuroscience, researchers have discovered that the brain actually predicts the future constantly, creating models of what's about to happen and updating them based on incoming sensory information. This predictive processing happens below the level of conscious awareness, but it shapes everything you experience. Your brain is always a fraction of a second ahead of the present, anticipating what's coming next, based on patterns learned from the past. In a sense, your consciousness lives slightly in the future, experiencing predictions that usually match reality closely enough that you don't notice the difference. This predictive nature of consciousness adds another layer to our thought experiment. If physical time stopped, would your brain's predictions suddenly become perfectly accurate, since nothing would change to contradict them? Or would the predictions themselves freeze, leaving consciousness in a strange state of expecting changes that never come? Perhaps this is part of what you would experience in our imagined scenario, a gradual realization that your predictions aren't being updated, that the expected next moment isn't arriving, that something fundamental has shifted in the relationship between your consciousness and the external world. Let's also consider how different cultures and philosophies have understood time. In Western thought influenced by Greek philosophy and Judeo-Christian theology, time is often seen as linear, a straight line from creation to ending, from past through present to future. But many Eastern philosophies see time as cyclical, constantly repeating in great wheels of existence. Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies describe vast cycles of creation and destruction, with the universe being born, evolving, dying, and being reborn over and over again. In these views, any particular moment, including our imagined frozen moment, is just one point on an eternal wheel, no more special or final than any other. Indigenous cultures often have even different relationships with time. Many Native American languages, for instance, don't have the same past, present, future tense structure that English does. Instead, they might distinguish between things that are manifest versus things that are becoming manifest, or between events that are completed versus events that are ongoing. These linguistic differences reflect and shape different ways of experiencing and understanding time. For speakers of these languages, our thought experiment might feel different, less paradoxical perhaps, more like a natural variation in the ways time can be experienced. Modern physics has given us even more exotic ways to think about time. In quantum mechanics, particles can exist in superposition, being in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Some interpretations suggest that time itself might branch and split at the quantum level, with every possible outcome of every quantum event creating a new timeline, a new universe. In this many worlds interpretation, our frozen moment might be just one branch among infinite branches, one way the universe could pause among countless ways it could continue. String theory, one attempt to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity, suggests that time might not be fundamental at all. Instead, it might emerge from something more basic, the way temperature emerges from the motion of particles. If time is emergent rather than fundamental, then the idea of it stopping while something else, consciousness, continues becomes less paradoxical. It would be like asking what would happen if temperature stopped but motion continued, or if color stopped but light continued. The question reveals the complex relationship between different levels of description, different ways of understanding reality. But let's bring this back to your immediate experience, to the thought experiment we're exploring together. You're imagining yourself in a moment where physical time has stopped, but your consciousness continues. Given everything we've explored about the nature of time, its relativity, its connection to entropy, its complex relationship with consciousness, what might this actually feel like? At first, you might not even notice. Time doesn't come with labels saying I'm flowing normally or I've stopped now. You would only notice through secondary effects, clocks not, ticking, sounds cutting off mid-wave, motion freezing in place. But once you realized what had happened, once you understood that you were experiencing something unprecedented in human history, how would your consciousness respond? You might feel a profound sense of freedom. Without the pressure of passing time, without deadlines approaching or opportunities slipping away, you could think without urgency. Every thought could be followed to its conclusion, every memory fully explored, every possibility thoroughly considered. The anxiety that often comes with time's passage, the fear of running out of time, of being late, of missing out, would simply evaporate. You would have, in a sense, all the time in the world, even though the world's time had stopped. Or you might feel a kind of vertigo, a disorientation at losing one of the fundamental organizing principles of experience. We structure so much of our mental life around time, planning for the future, learning from the past, coordinating with others in the present. Without time's flow, these mental habits would suddenly have nowhere to attach. It might be like trying to walk when gravity has been turned off, or trying to see when light has changed its fundamental properties. You might also discover aspects of your consciousness you never knew existed. Without the constant input of a changing world, without new sensory information flowing in, your awareness might turn inward in unprecedented ways. You might become conscious of mental processes that usually happen below the threshold of awareness, the way thoughts form before you think them, the way memories reconstruct themselves each time you recall them, the way emotions arise and fade in waves of feeling. This inward turn might reveal that consciousness is far richer, far more complex than you ever realized. Like an astronomer whose eyes have adjusted to darkness suddenly seeing thousands of stars that were invisible in the glare of city lights, you might discover layers and dimensions of awareness that were always there but never noticed in the busy flow of ordinary time. As we prepare to move into the next phase of our exploration, to see what lies beyond your room in this time-frozen world, it's worth pausing, if we can pause in a world that's already paused, to appreciate the profound mystery of time itself. We live with it every moment of our lives, yet we barely understand what it is. We measure it with increasing precision. Atomic clocks can now track time to better than 1 second in 300 billion years, yet we can't say definitively whether it's fundamental or emergent, whether it flows or whether that flow is an illusion, whether it had a beginning or will have an end. In our thought experiment, we're playing with these mysteries, exploring what it might mean for consciousness to exist outside of time's normal flow. This isn't just an idle fantasy. It's a way of probing the deep questions that lie at the heart of existence. What is the relationship between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality, between the time we feel passing in our consciousness and the time we measure with our instruments? These questions don't have easy answers, and perhaps they never will. But there's something beautiful about that uncertainty, something liberating about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge while still daring to imagine beyond them. In a universe that often seems coldly mechanical, rigidly determined by physical laws, these mysteries remind us that reality is far stranger, far more wonderful than we often assume. The time you normally experience, the steady tick-tock of seconds and minutes and hours, is just one face of something far more complex and mysterious. Time can stretch and compress, flow at different rates for different observers, maybe even stop entirely while consciousness continues its journey. These possibilities don't diminish the reality of the time you experience every day. If anything, they make it more remarkable. Every moment you experience is a small miracle, a point where consciousness and cosmos meet, where subjective experience and objective reality interweave in ways we're only beginning to understand. And now, in this moment that is no longer a moment, in this breath that neither begins nor ends, you open your eyes fully to the frozen world around you, not the startled opening of someone waking from a nightmare, not the groggy emergence from deep sleep, but a gentle, curious opening, like a flower turning toward a sun that has forgotten how to move across the sky. Your room, so familiar that you could navigate it in complete darkness, has become something entirely new. A gallery of stillness, a museum of the suspended moment, a three-dimensional photograph that you can explore from within. The first thing you might notice is the quality of the silence. It's not the ordinary quiet of a peaceful night, where small sounds still persist. The whisper of air through vents, the distant hum of electricity in the walls, the subtle creaking of a building settling into itself. This is absolute silence, a quiet so complete that you can hear. What? Not your heartbeat, for your heart, like everything else physical, has paused mid-beat. Not your breathing, for your lungs have stopped mid-breath. What you hear, perhaps, is the sound of consciousness itself, if consciousness has a sound. Maybe it's like the faint ringing that sometimes fills your ears in very quiet places, what some call the sound of your own nervous system. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something that has always been there but was always masked by the constant noise of a universe in motion. In this profound silence, your vision seems to sharpen, as if the absence of sound has freed up mental resources for seeing. The dust motes you noticed earlier, suspended in their shaft of moonlight or streetlight, are not just frozen. They're revealed in all their complexity. Each tiny particle is its own world, some rough and angular, others smooth and round, some catching the light like microscopic diamonds, others absorbing it like tiny black holes. You've seen dust before, of course, watched it dance in sunbeams, but you've never really seen it like this, never had the chance to examine it without its constant motion blurring the details. The light itself has become strange. Photons, those packets of electromagnetic energy that normally race through space at the ultimate speed limit of the universe, have stopped their journey. Yet somehow, and this is part of the beautiful impossibility of our thought experiment, you can still see. Perhaps your consciousness, existing now outside of normal time, can perceive the frozen photons directly, reading their wavelengths and intensities without needing them to actually strike your retina. Or perhaps, in this timeless state, your awareness generates its own kind of light, a luminosity of consciousness that illuminates without photons, reveals without radiation. The shadows in your room have become sculptures of darkness, their edges sharp and definite in a way shadows never are in the moving world. That shadow cast by your lamp has edges you've never noticed, gradients of grey that tell the story of how light diffracts around objects, how photons that barely graze the lampshade create a penumbra of partial illumination. The shadow of your hand, if it was raised when time stopped, might reveal the delicate tracery of blood vessels beneath the skin, frozen in their moment of translucence. Your blanket, which you've pulled up and adjusted countless times without really looking at it, now reveals itself as a landscape of fabric. Each fold and wrinkle has been caught in a specific configuration that will never repeat exactly, like a mountain range made of cotton or wool. The texture of the fabric, usually felt rather than seen, is visible in the play of frozen light across its surface. You can see individual threads, some catching the light, others hiding in tiny valleys of shadow. There might be a small pill of fabric that was about to fall off, now suspended in space just barely connected to the blanket, defying gravity not through any force, but through the simple absence of time in which to fall. If there's a glass of water on your nightstand, and let's imagine there is, it has become a sculpture of impossible beauty. The surface of the water, which normally trembles with the slightest vibration, is now perfectly still, like a mirror made of liquid crystal. But it's not flat. It has the slight meniscus where it meets the glass, that curve created by surface tension and molecular attraction. Any bubbles in the water have stopped their rise to the surface, hanging at various depths like tiny planets in a liquid universe. If you had just taken a sip before time stopped, there might be ripples frozen on the surface, concentric circles of disturbance that will never complete their journey to the edge of the glass. The air itself, usually invisible except when filled with smoke or steam, has taken on a quality of presence. You can't see individual molecules, of course, they're far too small, but you can sense the air as a substance, as something with weight and texture and even, perhaps, colour. The nitrogen and oxygen and trace gases that you normally breathe without thinking have become a frozen ocean of atoms, each one paused in its random thermal motion. The temperature of the room, usually felt as warmth or coolness, has become something else, a static property, neither warming nor cooling, just existing as a fixed characteristic of this frozen space. Your own body presents perhaps the strangest experience of all. You can still feel it, the weight of your limbs, the pressure of the mattress against your back, the soft touch of fabric against your skin. But these sensations don't change. That slight itch you might normally scratch without thinking is frozen at exactly the same intensity, neither growing worse nor fading away. The comfortable position you were in when time stopped remains perfectly comfortable. There's no gradual stiffening, no need to shift or adjust. Your body has become a constant, a fixed point of reference in a world where reference points no longer move. But here's where our thought experiment becomes particularly interesting. If your physical body is frozen like everything else, how are you experiencing anything at all? Where exactly is the you that's doing the observing? Are you somehow viewing your frozen body from outside, a disembodied consciousness floating free from its physical substrate? Or are you still within your body but existing in some non-physical dimension of it, a ghost in a machine that has temporarily stopped running? Perhaps the answer is that consciousness, whatever it ultimately is, exists at a different level of reality than the physical processes that usually generate or sustain it. Like a television show that continues to exist as electromagnetic waves, even when all the TV sets are turned off, perhaps consciousness continues to exist even when the brain that usually experiences it has paused. This isn't to say that consciousness is supernatural or mystical. It might simply be that it operates according to different rules than the matter and energy we're familiar with. As you lie there, observing your frozen room with unfrozen awareness, you might begin to experiment with the boundaries of this strange state. Can you move your eyes to look around, or are they frozen too? If you try to turn your head, does it respond, or do you find yourself locked in whatever position you were in when time stopped? These questions probe the interface between your continuing consciousness and your paused physical form, exploring where one ends and the other begins. Let's imagine that you find you cannot move your physical body. It's frozen like everything else. But your point of view, your center of awareness can shift and move. Not dramatically, not like flying around the room, but subtly, like the way your attention can shift from one thought to another without your brain physically moving. You can focus on different parts of your visual field, examine different aspects of what you're perceiving, even though your eyes remain fixed. This limitation might initially feel constraining, but as you adjust to it, you might discover it has its own strange freedom. Without the constant small movements of normal vision, the saccades and microsaccades that your eyes usually make several times per second, you can see details that are normally blurred by motion. The texture of your ceiling, which you've stared at during countless sleepless nights, reveals patterns and imperfections you've never noticed. That small crack you've been meaning to fix has a geography all its own, with tiny ridges and valleys like a miniature canyon system. If there's a clock in your room, analog or digital, it has become a monument to time's absence. An analog clock's second hand is frozen between ticks, caught in that tiny pause that usually lasts less than a heartbeat. You can see the tension in the mechanism, the spring coiled and ready to push the hand forward, the gears meshed and prepared to turn, all the potential energy of the clockwork held in perfect suspension. A digital clock might be even stranger, perhaps caught mid-transition between one number and the next, the LED segments half lit in a configuration that would normally be too brief to perceive. The window in your room, if you have one, has become a portal to a frozen world beyond. The glass itself, usually so transparent as to be nearly invisible, now reveals its presence through the tiny imperfections and dust particles on its surface. Each speck of dust casts its own tiny shadow, creates its own microscopic interference pattern in the frozen light passing through. If it's night outside, the darkness beyond the glass is not the living darkness of a normal night, full of subtle movement and distant sounds, but a darkness as still as everything else, as if the night itself has been paused. Through that window, whether it's night or day in our imagined scenario, you might see a tree, its leaves caught mid-rustle, in a breeze that no longer blows. Each leaf is frozen at a different angle, creating a complex three-dimensional sculpture of foliage that would be impossible to perceive in a moving world. Some leaves might be caught in the process of turning, showing their lighter undersides, while others display their darker tops. The overall effect is like seeing every possible position of the leaves simultaneously, a superposition of all the tree's potential movements captured in a single frozen instant. If there are any insects visible, perhaps a moth drawn to a light, or a fly that had been buzzing around the room, they've become tiny sculptures suspended in space. A moth's wings, which normally beat so fast they're just a blur, are now visible in perfect detail. You can see the delicate scales that give moth wings their powdery texture, the intricate patterns that usually flash by too quickly to appreciate. The moth's antennae, normally in constant motion as they sample the air for chemical signals, are frozen in whatever position they happen to be in, perhaps curved in slightly different directions as they were tracking different scents. The very walls of your room, which you probably think of as solid and unchanging, reveal themselves to be more dynamic than you realized. Paint isn't just a uniform coating, but a complex landscape of tiny ridges and valleys, brushstrokes frozen in time from when the room was last painted. If there's wallpaper, you can see where edges have begun to peel, caught in the act of curling away from the wall but never completing the motion. Even seemingly perfect walls have tiny cracks, places where the building has settled over time, each crack a frozen river system of stress and adaptation. Your furniture, too, has stories to tell in this frozen moment. That chair you've sat in hundreds of times shows the exact degree to which its cushion was compressed when time stopped. The fabric might be caught mid-wrinkle, creating patterns of light and shadow that reveal how the material responds to stress. Wood grain, usually just a background pattern, becomes a history of the tree that provided the wood, each ring representing a year of growth, droughts, and good seasons written in the spacing of the lines. If you have books in your room, they've become monuments to frozen knowledge. Their pages, if any were open, are caught mid-turn, perhaps curved in an elegant arc that would normally last less than a second. You can see how paper bends, how it catches light differently depending on the angle, how the printed words seem to float just slightly above the white background thanks to the three-dimensional nature of ink on paper. A bookmark might be caught falling out, suspended between book and floor, its descent interrupted by time's pause. Electronic devices in your room have become particularly strange. A computer screen, if it was on, shows a single frozen frame of whatever was being displayed. But if you look closely, you might see the individual pixels, each one frozen in its particular color, creating the illusion of a continuous image through their collective effect. The screen's refresh, usually happening 60 or more times per second, has been caught mid-cycle. Some pixels might be in the process of changing color, caught between one state and another, revealing the usually invisible process by which digital images are created. Your phone, if it's visible, has become a black mirror or a frozen window to the digital world, depending on whether its screen was on or off. If it was on, you might see a notification caught, in the act of appearing, or a video paused not by deliberate action but by the universe-wide pause that has overtaken everything. The phone's LED indicator, if it was blinking, might be caught mid-flash, neither fully on nor fully off, but suspended in some intermediate state of illumination. The temperature of your room, which you normally feel as a general sense of warmth or coolness, has become something more complex in this frozen state. Without air circulation, without the constant mixing that usually evens out temperature differences, you might become aware of subtle gradients. Warmer near the window if it's day, cooler near the floor, slightly warmer near any electronics that were running. These temperature differences don't change, don't equalize as they normally would, but remain as invisible layers in the frozen air. Sound, or rather its absence, continues to be one of the most striking aspects of this frozen world. In normal life, even in what we call silence, there are always tiny sounds. The high-pitched whine of electronics, the low rumble of distant traffic, the subtle whisper of air movement. Now, all of these have stopped. The air molecules that would normally carry sound waves are frozen in place, unable to vibrate, unable to transmit the pressure waves that we perceive as sound. It's a silence more complete than anything achievable in the normal world, even in the most sophisticated soundproof chamber. In this silence, you might become aware of sounds that aren't really sounds, the internal experiences that your brain generates in the absence of external input. Maybe there's a ringing, or a hum, or a rhythm like a heartbeat that isn't actually your heart beating. These phantom sounds, usually masked by real acoustic input, might become more prominent, filling the silence with the noise of consciousness itself, or perhaps, after a time, even these internal sounds fade, leaving a quiet so profound that it becomes its own kind of presence. The light in your room deserves more consideration. We've established that somehow you can still see despite photons being frozen, but what does this mean for the quality of light itself? Colours might appear more vivid, more pure, without the constant fluctuations that usually occur as light sources flicker imperceptibly and shadows shift minutely. That warm yellow light from your lamp is frozen at exactly one colour temperature, without the tiny variations that usually occur as the bulb's filament responds to microscopic changes in electrical current. If there's natural light coming through your window, moonlight or sunlight depending on when time stopped, it has a quality different from artificial light. Sunlight, normally constantly changing as the sun moves across the sky and clouds pass by, is now fixed at one specific angle and intensity. The shadows it creates are sharp and unchanging, like those in a photograph with an infinite exposure time. Moonlight, usually so subtle and shifting, has become a steady silver illumination, perhaps revealing colours that are usually too faint to see in the darkness. Reflections have become particularly interesting in this frozen world. Every surface that can reflect light, mirrors, glass, polished wood, even your own eyes if you could see them, has become a perfect, unchanging record of what it was reflecting when time stopped. A mirror doesn't show your current state, but your state at the moment of the freeze. If you were moving when time stopped, your reflection might show you caught mid-gesture, a sculpture of yourself that you can observe but cannot change. The boundary between your room and the world beyond has become more pronounced in some ways, less in others. The walls that usually separate inside from outside are still there, of course, but the usual exchange, air flowing through tiny gaps, sound passing through walls, heat conducting through materials, has stopped. Your room has become a perfectly isolated bubble in the frozen universe, connected to the outside world visually through windows but otherwise completely separate. And yet, in another sense, the boundary has dissolved. Without time, without change, without the constant flow of cause and effect, your room is no longer a separate space but part of one continuous frozen moment that encompasses everything. The air molecules just inside your window are as still as those just outside. The light frozen in your room is continuous, with the light frozen throughout the universe. You are simultaneously perfectly isolated and perfectly connected to everything else. As you continue to observe this frozen tableau, you might begin to notice things that were in motion when time stopped. Perhaps a curtain was swaying in a breeze from an open window. Now it hangs in space, caught in an S-curve that would normally exist for only a fraction of a second. The fabric is frozen mid-billow, creating three-dimensional shapes that reveal how air moves around objects, how flexible materials respond to forces. You can see the exact pattern of how the curtain was moving, which parts were moving faster, which were lagging behind, how the wave of motion was propagating through the fabric. If a fan was running, its blades are frozen in a position that would normally be invisible to the human eye. You can see their exact shape, the way they cut through the air, the slight bend in each blade that helps move air efficiently. The air that was being moved by the fan is also frozen, perhaps leaving visible patterns in any dust or smoke that was present. Swirls and eddies caught like a three-dimensional painting of fluid dynamics. Water, if any was in motion when time stopped, has become particularly beautiful. A drop of water falling from a faucet might be caught mid-fall, a perfect teardrop shape that reveals how surface tension and gravity compete to shape falling liquids. If someone had just washed their hands, there might be water, droplets flying through the air, each one a tiny sphere of liquid suspended in space, some still connected by thin bridges of water that were in the process of breaking apart. The more you observe, the more you realize that what seemed like a simple static scene is actually incredibly complex. Every object, every surface, every particle of dust tells a story about what was happening in the moment before time stopped. The direction dust motes were traveling, the way fabric was moving, the pattern of ripples in water, all of these preserve a record of forces and movements that are now suspended. Your room has become a three-dimensional graph of vectors and velocities, all frozen at the same instant. This frozen moment also preserves emotional and psychological states in a way. The arrangement of objects in your room tells the story of your recent activities. An open book shows what you were reading. A half-finished drink indicates a pause in consumption. Clothes draped over a chair speak to your habits and routines. Even the position of your pillow, the way your blankets are arranged, the items you keep close at hand on your nightstand. All of these are frozen testimonies to your life as it was lived up until the moment time stopped. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this frozen world is what it reveals about the nature of change itself. We usually think of objects as things that persist through time, maintaining their identity while undergoing various changes. But now, with change impossible, objects reveal themselves to be more like processes than things. That seemingly solid chair is actually a collection of atoms held in a particular arrangement by forces that are themselves frozen. The water in your glass isn't really a thing, but a temporary gathering of H2O molecules that happened to be in that location when time stopped. Even your own body, which feels so solid and permanent, is revealed to be a process that has been paused. The countless chemical reactions that usually sustain life, the flow of blood that was carrying oxygen to your cells, the electrical impulses that were travelling through your nerves, all of these processes are frozen mid-occurrence. You are, in a very real sense, a wave that has stopped waving, a dance that has stopped dancing, a story that has stopped being told, and yet your consciousness continues. This is the central mystery and wonder of our thought experiment. While everything physical has frozen into a three-dimensional sculpture of a four-dimensional process, your awareness continues its journey. You can still think, still observe, still wonder. You can form new thoughts, even though the neurons that usually generate thoughts are frozen. You can have new experiences even though the sensory systems that usually provide experiences are paused. This continuation of consciousness in a frozen world suggests something profound about the nature of awareness itself. Perhaps consciousness is not produced by the brain in the way that bile is produced by the liver. Perhaps instead, consciousness is something that uses the brain, something that usually works through neural processes but isn't entirely dependent on them. Like a radio wave that continues to exist even when all the radios are turned off, consciousness might have an existence independent of its usual physical substrate. As you lie in your bed, in your frozen room, in your paused universe, you might feel a strange mixture of confinement and freedom. You're confined because you cannot move, cannot change anything, cannot interact with the world in the usual ways. But you're free because you have unlimited time to think, to observe, to contemplate. There's no rush, no urgency, no deadline approaching. You can spend as long as you want examining the play of light on a single surface, contemplating the meaning of a single frozen moment, exploring the depths of your own consciousness. This freedom from time's pressure might reveal how much of our usual mental activity is driven by time's passage. Without the need to plan for the next moment, without the ability to affect what comes next, your thoughts might take on a different quality. Instead of the usual forward-driving narrative of planning and anticipating, your consciousness might become more contemplative, more exploratory, more willing to dwell in the present, even if that present is a frozen moment that will never change. You might also discover that without external change to mark time's passage, your subjective sense of duration becomes unreliable. Have you been observing this frozen world for minutes, hours, days? Without clocks ticking, without the sun moving across the sky, without your body's rhythms of hunger and fatigue, there's no way to know. Time, for you, has become purely psychological, measured only by the succession of thoughts and observations in your consciousness. This uncertainty about duration might be unsettling at first, but it might also be liberating. Without the constant awareness of time passing, without the mental countdown that usually accompanies our activities, you might find a different kind of peace. The anxiety that comes from feeling time slip away, the fear of wasting time, the pressure to use time productively, all of these time-related stresses simply evaporate in a world where time has stopped. As we prepare to expand our observation beyond your room, to see what has become of the wider world in this frozen moment, take a moment, if moments still have meaning, to appreciate the profound strangeness of what you're experiencing. You are, in our imagination, the only conscious observer in a universe that has paused mid-breath. You are witness to a sight that no human eyes have ever seen, the world not as it usually appears, blurred by constant motion and change, but as it actually is in a single, precise instant. This frozen tableau that surrounds you is both utterly familiar, it's your room after all, filled with your things, and completely alien. It's a place you know intimately that has become strange through stillness, a space you've inhabited for countless hours that has revealed new depth through the simple absence of change. Every dust mote, every shadow, every reflection has become a small wonder, a tiny mystery worth contemplating. And at the centre of it all is you, or rather your consciousness, that mysterious something that continues to experience and observe even when everything else has stopped. You are the anomaly in this frozen universe, the one point of change in an unchanging cosmos, the single flowing stream in a world that has become ice. What this means, what this reveals about the nature of consciousness and time and reality itself, is something we'll continue to explore as we expand our view beyond your room and into the frozen world that waits beyond. Beyond your window, beyond the familiar boundaries of your room where we've spent so much time observing the impossible stillness, the entire Earth waits in its frozen majesty. Our planet, which has spun on its axis for 4.5 billion years, which has circled the sun in an endless dance of seasons and cycles, has paused mid-rotation, mid-orbit, mid-breath. And you, with your still-flowing consciousness, are about to witness something no human eyes have ever seen. The Earth is a single perfect moment, stretched out infinitely in all directions, a living world caught in the amber of frozen time. Let's begin this expanded exploration gently, starting with what you might see just outside your window. If you live in a city, the streetlights are frozen in their glow, neither flickering nor varying in intensity. Each pool of light they cast is perfectly still, the boundaries between light and shadow sharp and unmoving. Any cars that were passing by are suspended mid-journey, their headlights creating cones of frozen illumination, their tyres caught in various stages of rotation. Some might be captured mid-turn, leaning slightly as they navigate a corner, the physics of their motion preserved but not progressing. The people who were walking on the sidewalks, if any were visible, have become statues more perfect than any sculptor could create. A businessman mid-stride, his tie cord floating behind him, his face showing the exact expression of someone hurrying to an appointment that will never arrive. A child jumping over a puddle, suspended in mid-air, the joy of the leap preserved in the angle of their body, the spread of their arms, the anticipation of landing that will never complete. A couple walking hand in hand, caught in whatever moment of their conversation, time chose to freeze. Perhaps one was laughing, the other smiling, their connection preserved in the space between them. Even the puddles on the ground, if it had rained recently, tell stories in their stillness. Raindrops that were still falling are suspended like crystal beads, strung on invisible threads. The ripples where drops had just hit the water are frozen in perfect concentric circles, each one a different size depending on when its drop made impact. The surface of the puddles might show the beginning of a reflection being disturbed, the image of the sky or buildings above wavering but never completing its distortion. If you're in a suburban area, the scene might be quieter but no less remarkable. Lawns are frozen with each blade of grass at a slightly different angle, creating a complex texture that's usually blurred by the constant small movements caused by air currents. If someone was mowing their lawn, you might see grass clippings suspended in a cloud behind the mower, each tiny piece caught in its trajectory, creating a three-dimensional map of how grass flies when cut. Sprinklers, if any were running, have created sculptures of water, arcs of droplets hanging in space, each drop a perfect sphere reflecting the world around it from a slightly different angle. Trees in yards and along streets have become monuments to the complexity of organic form. Each leaf is frozen at its own unique angle, creating a canopy that reveals the true three-dimensional structure usually hidden by constant motion. Birds that were flying between branches are suspended mid-flight, their wings spread in positions that would normally be too fast to see clearly. You can observe the exact mechanics of flight, how their feathers adjust, how their bodies angle through the air, how their eyes focus on their destination. But let's expand our view further, rise higher in our imagination, and see what has become of entire cities in this frozen moment. From above, and in our thought experiment, your consciousness can take this elevated perspective. A city at night would appear as a constellation of lights frozen in perfect stillness. The usual twinkling caused by atmospheric distortion has stopped. The flowing rivers of headlights and taillights on highways have become static lines of red and white, showing the exact traffic patterns at the moment time paused. In downtown areas, neon signs are caught mid-blink, some letters fully illuminated, others dark, creating words that might be partially visible or entirely transformed by the missing letters. Digital billboards show single frames of advertisements that were meant to change every few seconds, their messages now permanent, at least for the duration of this pause. The windows of office buildings create a mosaic of frozen scenes, some dark, some showing people at desks, caught mid-typing or mid-conversation on phones that will never complete their calls. Construction sites, if any were active, have become particularly interesting sculptures of work in progress. Cranes are frozen with loads suspended in mid-air, defying gravity not through engineering, but through time's absence. Welding torches, if any were in use, show frozen sparks spreading in all directions, each spark a tiny star following its own trajectory that will never complete. Concrete being poured has become a frozen waterfall of stone, showing exactly how the thick liquid flows and spreads. Parks and natural areas within cities offer a different kind of frozen beauty. Fountains have become ice sculptures made of liquid water, their jets caught mid-rise, mid-fall, mid-splash. The droplets that usually create a mist around fountains are suspended like a cloud of diamonds, each one refracting light in its own way. Ducks on ponds are caught mid-paddle, some with one foot in the water, one out, showing the usually invisible mechanics of how waterbirds propel themselves. The wakes behind them are frozen V-shapes, the water's surface showing exactly how it was disturbed by their passage. Playgrounds, if children were playing when time stopped, have become strange galleries of frozen joy. Swings are caught at various points in their arcs, some at the highest point where gravity was about to take over, others mid-swing with children's hair streaming behind them. Slides might show children at various stages of descent, their expressions ranging from anticipation at the top to delight in the middle to the preparation for landing at the bottom. A merry-go-round might be frozen mid-spin, its riders leaning outward from centrifugal force that no longer applies. Now, let's journey beyond the cities, out into the countryside where nature dominates the landscape. Fields of grain, if it's the right season, are frozen mid-wave, showing the exact pattern of how wind moves through crops. Each stalk is bent at a slightly different angle, creating waves that will never complete their journey across the field. If it was harvest time, perhaps combines are frozen mid-harvest, showing clouds of chaff suspended in the air, the exact moment of separation between grain and stalk preserved in three-dimensional detail. Rivers and streams have become ribbons of frozen motion, their surfaces showing every ripple, every eddy, every small whirlpool preserved in perfect detail. Waterfalls are perhaps the most spectacular, thousands of tons of water suspended in mid-fall, showing the complex patterns of how water breaks apart as it falls, how mist forms, how the force of falling water creates upheavals in the pool below. Each droplet in the mist around a waterfall is its own tiny prism, splitting white light into rainbows that are themselves frozen mid-shimmer. Wildlife, caught in whatever they were doing when time stopped, creates scenes of natural behavior frozen for observation. A deer mid-leap over a fence shows the incredible athleticism of these seemingly gentle creatures. A hawk diving for prey is suspended in a position of fierce concentration, its wings folded for speed, its talons extended for the grab that will never complete. Insects frozen in flight reveal wing positions and body angles that are usually too fast for human eyes to perceive, A butterfly's wings might be caught mid-flap, showing the complex way they twist and flex to generate lift and thrust. The oceans, those vast bodies of water that cover most of our planet, have become something unprecedented. Perfectly still seas showing every wave, every whitecap, every swell frozen in place. From above, the ocean's surface would look like a vast sculpture of water, with waves of all sizes creating a complex texture that extends to the horizon. Ships at sea are frozen mid-voyage, some riding high on wave crests, others in the troughs, their wakes extending behind them in frozen foam. Beneath the ocean's surface, and in our thought experiment, your consciousness can perceive this too. Marine life is suspended in an underwater ballet. Schools of fish are frozen in their synchronized swimming, each fish at a slightly different angle as they turn together. Dolphins caught mid-leap show the grace of their arcing bodies, water streaming off their skin in frozen droplets. In the depths, creatures that usually exist in total darkness are frozen in their bioluminescent displays, their living lights creating constellations in the deep ocean. Beaches where waves were breaking have become galleries of fluid dynamics. Each wave is frozen at a different stage of breaking, some just beginning to curl, others in full tube formation, still others in the chaos of foam and spray after breaking. Surfers, if any were riding waves, are captured in moments of perfect balance or spectacular wipeout, their boards cutting through water that will never splash. Seabirds diving for fish are suspended just above or below the surface, their bodies showing the adaptations that allow them to transition between air and water. The atmosphere itself, usually invisible except for clouds and weather phenomena, reveals its structure in this frozen moment. Clouds at various altitudes show different formations: cumulus clouds like frozen cotton balls, stratus clouds like suspended blankets, cirrus clouds like frozen brushstrokes high in the atmosphere. If there were storms when time stopped, they've become monuments to nature's power, lightning bolts frozen mid-strike, creating jagged sculptures of electricity connecting cloud to ground. Tornadoes frozen mid-spin, their funnel clouds showing the exact spiral pattern of their rotation. Rain frozen in sheets, showing how precipitation doesn't fall uniformly, but in complex patterns determined by wind and atmospheric pressure. In polar regions, the interaction between ice and water is frozen in particularly beautiful ways. Icebergs caught in the process of calving show massive chunks of ice suspended between glacier and ocean. Polar bears hunting on ice floes are frozen mid-stride or mid-pounce. Penguins diving into water are caught in various stages of their plunge, some just leaving the ice, others creating frozen splashes as they enter the sea. The aurora borealis or australis, if visible, would be frozen curtains of light, their usual, dancing motion stilled into static veils of green and pink and blue. Deserts, those places where time often seems to move slowly anyway, have their own frozen wonders. Sand dunes show the exact pattern of how wind was reshaping them, with individual grains caught mid-flight in the process of erosion and deposition. Desert animals, many of which are nocturnal, might be frozen in their nighttime activities, snakes mid-slither, leaving S-shaped impressions in the sand. Owls with wings spread wide hunting for prey, small mammals frozen mid-scurry between bushes. Mountains reveal the constant but usually imperceptible processes of erosion and change. Rocks that were falling are suspended mid-tumble. Snow that was sliding in small avalanches is frozen in white cascades down mountainsides. Mountain streams are frozen in their tumbling descent, showing how water navigates around and over rocks. Clouds that often shroud mountain peaks are frozen in their interaction with the terrain, showing how mountains affect weather patterns. Volcanic regions, if any were active when time stopped, would show some of the most dramatic frozen scenes. Lava fountains would be frozen mid-eruption, creating sculptures of molten rock. Ash clouds would be suspended in their billowing expansion. Lava flows would be frozen rivers of rock, their surfaces showing the exact pattern of cooling and movement. The heat shimmer above hot surfaces would be frozen, creating visible distortions in the air that are usually too fleeting to observe. Agricultural lands show the intersection of human activity and natural processes. Irrigation systems might be frozen mid-spray, creating arcs of water over crops. Livestock caught mid-movement show the patterns of grazing, the social dynamics of herds, the individual personalities of animals frozen in their expressions and postures. Barns and farmhouses sit in their rural settings, smoke from chimneys frozen in its rise, creating sculptural columns that show how air currents were affecting the smoke's path. Cities at different times of day would show dramatically different frozen scenes. A city frozen at rush hour would be packed with suspended activity. Crowded sidewalks, packed subway platforms, busy restaurants. The same city frozen at 3 a.m. would be nearly empty, with just a few night workers, late revelers, or early risers caught in their activities. The contrast would reveal how human activity creates rhythms and patterns that are usually experienced through time but can now be observed as spatial distributions. Industrial areas would show the complex processes of production, frozen mid-operation. Factory assembly lines would be caught with products at every stage of manufacture. Chemical plants might show reactions frozen mid-process, though of course the actual molecular changes would be paused. Power plants would show the exact moment of energy generation. Turbines frozen mid-spin, cooling towers with steam frozen in there, billowing rise. The entire industrial metabolism of human civilization would be revealed as a vast, interconnected but now motionless machine. Transportation networks would appear as frozen rivers of movement. Airports would show planes at every stage of takeoff and landing, some just lifting off, others suspended in the sky, still others touching down with puffs of tyre smoke frozen at the moment of contact. Train stations would show trains frozen in arrival or departure, passengers caught mid-step on platforms. Highways would reveal traffic patterns, showing where congestion occurs, where traffic flows freely, where accidents might have been about to happen, but now never will. The electrical grid, invisible but essential, would be frozen in its state of energy distribution. Power lines would still hold their electrical potential, though no current would flow. Transformers would be caught mid-hum, their electromagnetic fields frozen. Cities lit up at night would show the exact pattern of energy use at the moment time stopped, which buildings were occupied, which streetlights were functioning, which signs were illuminated. It would be a frozen snapshot of humanity's electrical nervous system. Communication networks, though mostly invisible, would have their physical components frozen. Satellite dishes would be pointed at satellites that are themselves frozen in orbit. Cell towers would be caught mid-transmission, though the radio waves themselves would be frozen like everything else. The internet's physical infrastructure, server farms, underground cables, routing stations, would be suspended in whatever state of information processing they were in. Billions of bits of data would be frozen in transit, emails half sent, videos half loaded, messages half received. Weather patterns on a global scale would be frozen in their complexity. High and low pressure systems would be suspended in their positions, neither moving nor changing. The jet stream would be frozen in whatever configuration it had, affecting weather patterns that will never develop. Hurricanes, if any were active, would be frozen spirals of clouds and wind. Their eyes perfectly visible, their spiral arms showing the exact structure of these massive storms. The entire global weather system would be like a three-dimensional weather map, but one showing the actual atmosphere rather than a simplified representation. The boundaries between different ecosystems would be frozen in their constant, but usually invisible state of flux. Where forest meets grassland, you could see the exact line where trees give way to open space, where different plant communities compete for resources. Where fresh water meets salt water in estuaries, the mixing zone would be frozen, showing the complex gradients of salinity. Where different climate zones meet, the transition would be captured in the vegetation, the soil, the very air itself. Human activities that span the globe would be frozen in various stages. Somewhere, someone was probably getting married when time stopped, the bride and groom frozen mid-kiss or mid-dance. Somewhere else, a baby was being born, frozen in that moment of transition into the world. People were dying too, frozen in their final moments, though in this peaceful thought experiment we don't dwell on suffering, but rather on the continuity of human experience that the frozen moment represents. Sports events that were in progress would become fascinating studies in athletic motion. A baseball frozen in flight between pitcher and batter, its seams visible, its trajectory clear. A soccer player mid-kick showing the exact deformation of the ball and the position of their body. A gymnast mid-flip defying gravity not through skill but through time suspension. A swimmer mid-stroke. Water streaming off their body in frozen droplets. Each sport would reveal the usually invisible mechanics of human movement and athletic achievement. Scientific experiments that were underway would be frozen mid-process. Particle accelerators would have particles frozen mid-collision. Telescopes would be frozen mid-observation, their mirrors reflecting light from stars that no longer twinkles. Laboratory experiments would be caught with reactions half complete, measurements half taken, discoveries half made. The entire scientific enterprise of humanity would be suspended, questions half answered, hypotheses half tested. The Earth's rotation itself, though frozen, would have left its mark on everything. The Coriolis effect would be visible in the frozen patterns of ocean currents and wind movements. The tides would be frozen at whatever height they had reached, showing the gravitational influence of the moon and sun. The Earth's magnetic field, though invisible, would have affected the frozen positions of compass needles everywhere, all pointing toward magnetic north but no longer able to move if disturbed. As we contemplate this frozen Earth, suspended between moments, it's worth reflecting on what this reveals about our planet as a system. Usually we think of Earth as a collection of separate things: land, ocean, atmosphere, life. But in this frozen moment, we can see that it's really one interconnected system, temporarily paused. The water cycle is frozen with water in every stage: vapor in the air, droplets in clouds, rain falling, rivers flowing, ice forming and melting. The carbon cycle is frozen with carbon in all its forms: CO2 in the atmosphere, dissolved in the oceans, locked in rocks, incorporated into living things. The frozen Earth also reveals the incredible amount of activity that usually occurs every second. Millions of cars moving, billions of hearts beating, trillions of leaves photosynthesizing. All of this activity is now visible as a frozen tableau. It's as if the Earth itself has become a museum exhibit, showing future observers. Though of course, there are no future observers in a world where time has stopped, exactly what life on Earth was like at this particular moment in its history. Different time zones would be frozen at different times of day, creating a gradient of human activity around the globe. While one side of the Earth is frozen in bright daylight with people at work and school, the other side is frozen in darkness with people asleep in their beds. The Terminator line, the boundary between day and night, would be frozen somewhere over the Earth, neither advancing nor retreating, creating a permanent sunset or sunrise for those locations caught at that boundary. Cities that never sleep, New York, Tokyo, London, would still show activity even if frozen at night, while smaller towns might be almost entirely still. The contrast would reveal how human civilization has created pockets of constant activity, places where the ancient rhythm of day and night has been overwritten by artificial light and human ambition. Yet even these 24-hour cities would be frozen, their constant activity transformed into a static display of what constant activity looks like when paused. The seasons too would be frozen in their progression. It might be summer in the northern hemisphere, winter in the southern, or vice versa. Trees would be frozen in whatever stage of their annual cycle they were in. Full green leaves, autumn colours, bare branches, or spring buds. Migrating animals would be frozen mid-journey, some heading north, others south, their ancient patterns of movement suspended. The Earth would be wearing whatever seasonal costume it had on when time stopped, unable to change into the next season's outfit. Climate patterns that usually develop over years or decades would be frozen at one particular moment in their cycles. El Niño or La Niña conditions, if present, would be frozen in their effects on global weather. The Arctic ice cap would be frozen at whatever extent it had reached, neither growing nor shrinking. Glaciers would be suspended in their slow flow, neither advancing nor retreating. The slow changes that usually mark Earth's climate would be paused, creating a snapshot of the planet's climatic state. From this elevated perspective, looking at the entire Earth frozen in a single moment, you might feel a profound sense of both connection and isolation. Connection because you can see how everything on Earth is interrelated, how every action affects everything else, how the planet is truly one system temporarily paused. Isolation because you are the only conscious observer of this frozen tableau, the only awareness capable of appreciating the complexity and beauty of the suspended Earth. The Earth, in this frozen state, has become something it has never been in its billions of years of existence, perfectly still. From its formation in the solar nebula through its cooling and the development of life, Earth has always been in motion, always changing, always dynamic. Now, in our imagination, it rests. Every earthquake is paused mid-tremor. Every volcano is frozen mid-breath. Every tide is suspended mid-flow. The planet that has never known true stillness has finally, impossibly found it. Let us now lift our consciousness beyond Earth's frozen atmosphere, beyond the suspended clouds and paused winds, out into the vast cathedral of space where our solar system hangs in its own frozen ballet. Here, in the vacuum between worlds, the absence of time takes on a different quality. Space itself, already silent and still in ways that Earth never is, has become something even more profound. A three-dimensional photograph of cosmic mechanics, a sculpture garden of worlds and moons, a frozen symphony of gravitational relationships that usually play out over millions and billions of years. The first thing you might notice as your awareness expands beyond Earth is the moon, our constant companion, frozen in its eternal dance around our planet. It hangs there, neither rising nor setting, locked in whatever phase it was displaying when time stopped. If it was full, its entire face is illuminated in frozen sunlight, every crater and mare visible in stark detail. If it was crescent, that delicate silver arc remains perfectly constant, neither waxing nor waning. The terminator line, that boundary between lunar day and night, is frozen precisely, creating a permanent ridge of shadows along crater rims and mountain peaks that would normally shift as the moon rotates. The moon's surface, already a monument to deep time with its billions of years of impact craters, has become even more timeless. Those few parts of the moon that still change, the occasional moonquake, the constant rain of micrometeorites, the slow degradation of human artifacts left by Apollo missions, have all paused. The footprints left by astronauts, which would normally last millions of years in the airless environment, have become truly eternal, at least for the duration of this cosmic pause. The flags planted by human hands are frozen mid-flutter in the solar wind that no longer blows, their fabrics suspended in whatever configuration the departing astronauts left them in. Between Earth and Moon, in the space that usually seems empty, there are actually numerous objects frozen in their orbits. Satellites of every description, communication satellites, weather satellites, spy satellites, scientific instruments, are suspended in their various trajectories. Some are in geostationary orbit, frozen above the same spot on Earth they were designed to monitor. Others are in polar orbits, caught somewhere in their north-south journey around the planet. The International Space Station, if there were astronauts aboard when time stopped, has become the strangest of all frozen environments, a bubble of human life suspended in the void, its inhabitants caught mid-float in the microgravity environment. The space debris that orbits Earth, spent rocket stages, defunct satellites, fragments from collisions, is frozen in its dangerous dance. Each piece, from the largest dead satellite to the tiniest paint fleck, is suspended in its orbit. The relative velocities that make space debris so dangerous are frozen too. A bolt that was travelling at 17,000 miles per hour relative to a spacecraft is now perfectly still, its kinetic energy suspended, its potential for destruction held in permanent abeyance. As we move our awareness outward from the Earth-Moon system, we encounter the Sun, that massive fusion reactor that has powered life on Earth for billions of years. The Sun, frozen in time, presents a paradox within our paradox. Its surface, usually a roiling sea of plasma with temperatures reaching millions of degrees, is now still. Solar flares that were erupting are frozen mid-explosion, creating arcs of superheated gas hundreds of thousands of miles high. Sunspots, those relatively cool regions that mark areas of intense magnetic activity, are frozen in whatever configuration they had reached, neither growing nor shrinking, neither appearing nor disappearing. The solar wind, that stream of charged particles that constantly flows from the Sun, has stopped its outward journey. These particles are frozen in space, creating an invisible sculpture of the Sun's influence extending throughout the solar system. The heliopause, that boundary where the solar wind meets the interstellar medium, is frozen in place, neither expanding nor contracting with the solar cycle. The Sun's magnetic field, which usually twists and changes in complex patterns, is frozen in one configuration, its invisible lines of force suspended like the strings of some cosmic harp that will never be played. The light from the Sun, those photons that usually take 8 minutes to travel from the Sun to Earth, are frozen in their journey. Somewhere between Sun and Earth, there are photons that left the Sun's surface but haven't yet reached our planet, suspended in the vacuum, carrying energy that will never be delivered. This frozen sunlight fills the solar system, creating a strange situation where light exists but doesn't travel, where illumination is present but static. Mercury, the innermost planet, is frozen in its eccentric orbit, somewhere in its 88-day journey around the Sun. One side of Mercury might be facing the Sun, experiencing temperatures that would normally reach 800 degrees Fahrenheit, while the other side faces the darkness of space at minus 290 degrees. But these temperatures are no longer changing. The boundary between Mercury's day and night sides, which usually creeps across the surface as the planet slowly rotates, is frozen. The planet's surface, scarred by billions of years of impacts and volcanic activity, shows no new changes. The Caloris Basin, one of the largest impact craters in the solar system, sits in whatever lighting it had when time stopped, its concentric rings of mountains casting shadows that will never move, Venus, shrouded in its thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid, is frozen beneath its cloudy veil. The superrotation of its atmosphere, which usually whips around the planet every 4 days, even though the planet itself takes 243 days to rotate, has stopped. The convection patterns in its atmosphere are frozen, creating a three-dimensional sculpture of how heat moves through dense gases. The surface of Venus, hot enough to melt lead, is frozen at that extreme temperature, neither cooling nor heating further. Any active volcanism, and scientists suspect Venus might still be volcanically active, is paused mid-eruption. The spacecraft we've sent to explore these worlds are frozen too. The Parker Solar Probe, if it was operating when time stopped, is suspended in its close approach to the Sun, neither advancing nor retreating from our star's frozen fury. Various Mars rovers are frozen mid-exploration on the red planet's surface, their wheels suspended over Martian soil, their cameras pointed at rocks they will never finish analysing. The Voyager probes, humanity's most distant ambassadors, are frozen in the outer reaches of the solar system, carrying their golden records with messages for civilizations that will never receive them if time remains stopped. Mars, the red planet that has captured human imagination for centuries, is frozen in its orbit, its day-night cycle paused, its seasons suspended. The polar ice caps, made of frozen water and carbon dioxide, are neither growing nor sublimating. Dust storms, if any were active, are frozen in their swirling patterns, creating three-dimensional sculptures of how particles move in Mars' thin atmosphere. Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, stands in frozen majesty, its peak reaching above most of Mars' atmosphere. The Valles Marineras, that vast canyon system, is frozen in whatever lighting it had, its depth shadowed or illuminated but never changing. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter is a frozen collection of rocks and metal, each asteroid suspended in its orbit. Ceres, the largest object in the asteroid belt and classified as a dwarf planet, is frozen with its mysterious bright spots neither brightening nor dimming. Vesta, with its giant impact crater, is suspended in space, neither rotating nor orbiting. The millions of smaller asteroids, from mountain-sized rocks to tiny pebbles, are all frozen in place, creating a sparse but static ring of debris around the Sun. Jupiter, the king of planets, presents a magnificent sight in its frozen state. The great red spot, that storm larger than Earth that has raged for centuries, is frozen mid-swirl. The bands of clouds that usually race around the planet at different speeds are now still, creating a pattern of stripes that reveals the complex atmospheric dynamics normally blurred by motion. The aurora at Jupiter's poles, created by its intense magnetic field, are frozen curtains of light. Lightning bolts in Jupiter's atmosphere are suspended mid-strike, creating frozen forks of electricity in the clouds. Jupiter's moons, each a world in its own right, are frozen in their orbits around the giant planet. Io, the most volcanically active body in the solar system, might have volcanic plumes frozen mid-eruption, creating fountains of sulfur suspended above its surface. Europa, with its subsurface ocean beneath a crust of ice, is frozen with whatever tidal flexing it was experiencing, the cracks in its ice neither opening nor closing. Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system, is suspended with its complex terrain of old and young surfaces frozen in whatever lighting they had. Callisto, heavily cratered and ancient, displays its scars in frozen permanence. Saturn, perhaps the most beautiful planet in our solar system, is frozen with its rings in whatever orientation they had relative to the Sun. The rings themselves, made of countless particles of ice and rock, are suspended in their orbits. Each particle, from house-sized chunks to microscopic crystals, is frozen in place, creating the illusion of solid rings when they're actually composed of billions of separate objects. The gaps in the rings, carved by the gravitational influence of Saturn's moons, are frozen in their positions. The spokes in the rings, those mysterious features that appear and disappear, are caught in whatever state of formation or dissipation they were in. Saturn's atmosphere, with its hexagonal storm at the North Pole, is frozen with that geometric pattern perfectly preserved. The hexagon, a standing wave in Saturn's atmosphere, is suspended in its six-sided configuration. The storms within Saturn's atmosphere are frozen mid-churn, their vortices suspended. The planet's aurora, created by its magnetic field's interaction with the solar wind, are frozen ribbons of light at the poles. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, and the only moon in our solar system with a substantial atmosphere, is frozen with its methane cycle suspended. Lakes of liquid methane and ethane on its surface are frozen mid-ripple if any wind was blowing. Clouds of methane in its atmosphere are suspended, neither forming nor dissipating. The thick orange haze that shrouds Titan is frozen in whatever patterns it had formed. Rivers of liquid hydrocarbons are frozen mid-flow, creating strange sculptures of alien liquids. Enceladus, with its geysers of water erupting from its south pole, might be frozen mid-eruption, creating fountains of ice crystals suspended above its surface. These geysers, which feed Saturn's E-ring, are frozen in their spray, each particle of ice suspended in its trajectory. The tiger stripes at Enceladus's south pole, those cracks from which the geysers emerge, are frozen in whatever state of opening or closing they were in. Uranus, tilted on its side so that it rolls along its orbit rather than spinning upright, is frozen in its unusual orientation. Its faint rings are suspended, neither dispersing nor consolidating. Its atmosphere, relatively featureless compared to Jupiter and Saturn but still dynamic, is frozen in whatever subtle patterns it displayed. Its moons, including Miranda with its bizarre patchwork surface, are frozen in their orbits, neither approaching nor receding from the planet. Neptune, the windiest planet in our solar system with winds that normally reach supersonic speeds, is frozen with those winds suspended. The Great Dark Spot, if one was present when time stopped, they come and go unlike Jupiter's more permanent storms, is frozen in its configuration. The bright clouds of methane ice that usually race around the planet are suspended like white brushstrokes against Neptune's deep blue atmosphere. Triton, Neptune's large moon that orbits backwards, is frozen in its retrograde orbit, its nitrogen geysers, if any were active, frozen mid-eruption. At the edge of our solar system, in the Kuiper belt, Pluto and the other dwarf planets are frozen in their distant orbits. Pluto's heart-shaped plain of nitrogen ice is frozen in whatever state of sublimation or condensation it was in. The atmosphere of Pluto, which freezes and falls to the surface as the dwarf planet moves away from the Sun in its elliptical orbit, is suspended in whatever state it had reached. Charon, Pluto's large moon, is frozen in its tidally locked position, always showing the same face to Pluto, though now that constancy has a different meaning in a world without time. The comets in our solar system are frozen in various states. Those in the outer reaches remain as dirty snowballs, suspended in their slow orbits. Any that were approaching the Sun when time stopped are frozen with their tails suspended, the dust tail and ion tail pointing in slightly different directions, creating a V-shape of frozen particles streaming away from the frozen comet. The particles in these tails are suspended in space, neither being pushed by solar wind nor falling back to the comet. The Oort cloud, that hypothetical sphere of icy bodies at the very edge of our solar system, is frozen in its configuration. These objects, so far from the Sun that they're barely bound to our solar system, are suspended in their million-year orbits. They're the frozen reservoir from which long-period comets come, though no new comets will be perturbed from their orbits as long as time remains stopped. Interplanetary space, which seems empty but actually contains a thin soup of particles and fields, is frozen in its complexity. Dust particles are suspended in their slow spiral toward the Sun. Magnetic fields are frozen in their configurations. Cosmic rays from outside our solar system are frozen in their paths, high-energy particles suspended mid-journey. The interplanetary medium, usually shaped by the solar wind and planetary magnetic fields, is frozen in whatever configuration it had achieved. The various space missions that were in progress when time stopped are frozen in their trajectories. Perhaps the James Webb Space Telescope was in the middle of an observation, its mirrors perfectly aligned but no new photons arriving to create an image. Maybe a probe was approaching an asteroid for study, frozen just kilometers from its target. Supply missions to the International Space Station might be frozen in various stages of their journey, some launching from Earth, others docking with the station, still others returning to Earth with experiments and waste. The boundaries of our solar system, the heliopause where solar wind meets interstellar space, the bow shock where our solar system plows through the interstellar medium, are frozen in place. These usually dynamic boundaries which expand and contract with solar activity and our motion through the galaxy are now fixed. The Voyager spacecraft which have crossed these boundaries are frozen in interstellar space, carrying their messages from Earth into a cosmos that has paused. As we contemplate this frozen solar system, we're seeing something that has never existed before, our cosmic neighborhood in perfect stillness. The solar system has been in constant motion since its formation 4.6 billion years ago. Planets have never stopped orbiting, moons have never stopped rotating, the sun has never stopped shining. But now, in our imagination, it all rests. The cosmic clockwork that has run for billions of years has paused, its gears frozen, its hands still. This stillness reveals the solar system as a system, not just a collection of objects, but an interconnected whole. The gravitational relationships between all these bodies are frozen but still present, like invisible threads connecting everything. Each planet's orbit is shaped by the sun and influenced by other planets. Each moon is held by its planet but also feels the pull of the sun and other moons. The asteroids are shepherded by Jupiter's gravity. The comets are perturbed by passing stars. All of these influences are frozen in a complex web of relationships that usually play out over time but now exist as a static structure. The frozen solar system also reveals the incredible emptiness of space. Even with all these planets and moons and asteroids and comets, the vast majority of the solar system is empty vacuum. If you could see the entire solar system with all its objects visible, it would still appear mostly empty, with tiny dots of matter separated by vast distances of nothing. This emptiness, usually traversed by light and particles and spacecraft, is now even emptier, with nothing moving through it. Yet this emptiness isn't truly empty. It's filled with frozen fields, gravitational, magnetic, electric. It's permeated by frozen light at every wavelength. It contains frozen particles of solar wind and cosmic rays. The vacuum itself, which quantum mechanics tells us is actually a seething foam of virtual particles popping into and out of existence, is frozen in one configuration of quantum fluctuations. The solar system, even frozen, is rich, with invisible structure and suspended energy. Beyond the boundaries of our solar system, beyond the frozen heliopause where solar wind no longer pushes against the interstellar medium, your consciousness now drifts into the vast spaces between stars. Here, in the seemingly empty void that separates our sun from its nearest neighbours, the frozen universe takes on yet another character. This is interstellar space, where distances are measured not in millions of miles but in light years, where the gaps between objects are so vast that even light, the fastest thing in the universe, would take years to cross them, if light was still moving, which in our frozen cosmos, it is not. The nearest star to our sun, Proxima Centauri, hangs in space just over 4 light-years away. In our frozen moment, it's suspended in whatever state of stellar activity it was experiencing. Proxima Centauri is a red dwarf, prone to stellar flares that can briefly increase its brightness. If such a flare was occurring when time stopped, it's now frozen mid-eruption, a tongue of stellar material suspended above the star's surface, neither rising further nor falling back. The star's regular pulsations, the subtle breathing of its outer layers, are paused. The convection cells that usually carry heat from its interior to its surface are frozen mid-churn, creating a pattern on the star's surface that would normally exist for only moments. Between our Sun and Proxima Centauri, the interstellar medium is frozen in its ethereal complexity. This space isn't truly empty, but filled with an incredibly thin gas, mostly hydrogen, with about 1 atom per cubic centimetre, compared to Earth's atmosphere, which has about 1019 atoms in the same volume. These lonely atoms are frozen in their positions, their random thermal motion suspended. Dust grains, tiny particles of carbon and silicon and other elements forged in the hearts of dying stars, are suspended in this thin gas-like microscopic islands in a vast frozen sea. The local bubble, the region of relatively empty space in which our solar system resides, is frozen in its expansion. This bubble, carved out by ancient supernovae that cleared away much of the interstellar gas, is about 300 light-years across. Its boundaries, where the thin gas inside meets the denser gas outside, are frozen like the walls of an invisible cavern in space. The loopy bubble, another such cavity that our local bubble is beginning to meet, is frozen at the exact moment of their interaction, two expanding voids meeting in slow motion that has now stopped entirely. As we expand our view further, we begin to see the local stellar neighbourhood in its frozen state. The Alpha Centauri system, of which Proxima is a part, shows its binary stars frozen in their orbit around each other. Alpha Centauri A and B, both similar to our Sun, are suspended in their 80-year dance, neither approaching nor receding from each other. Any planets orbiting these stars, and we know there's at least one orbiting Proxima, are frozen in their orbits, their days and nights suspended, their seasons paused. Barnard's star, a red dwarf about 6 light-years away, is frozen in its high proper motion across our sky. This star, which usually moves faster against the background stars than any other star visible from Earth, is now perfectly still. The subtle wobble that might indicate planets orbiting it is frozen mid-wobble. The star's surface, cooler and calmer than our Sun's, shows whatever pattern of star spots and convection it had when time stopped. Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky, is frozen in its brilliant blue-white glory about 8.6 light-years away. It's actually a binary system, Sirius A, the bright star we see, and Sirius B, a white dwarf companion. The white dwarf, the collapsed core of a star that died long ago, is frozen in its orbit around Sirius A. The intense gravity of the white dwarf, which would normally bend space-time around it in ways that create observable effects, is frozen in its warping of space. The surface of the white dwarf, where a teaspoon of material would weigh as much as a car on Earth, is suspended in whatever state of crystallization it had reached. As we continue outward, we encounter stars in various stages of their life cycles, all frozen in their particular moments. Red giants, stars that have exhausted their core hydrogen and swelled to enormous size, are frozen in their bloated state. Betelgeuse, the red supergiant in Orion's shoulder, is frozen in whatever stage of its dramatic variability it was in. This star, which will one day explode as a supernova, might have been in the process of one of its dramatic dimmings or brightenings when time stopped. Its surface, which usually shows enormous convection cells the size of Earth's orbit, is frozen mid-boil. Planetary nebulae, the beautiful shells of gas expelled by dying stars, are frozen in their expansion. The Cat's Eye Nebula, the Ring Nebula, the Helix Nebula, all are suspended in their outward journey. The complex shells and filaments of gas, usually expanding at tens of kilometers per second, are perfectly still. The central white dwarfs that power these nebulae with their ultraviolet radiation are frozen, their slow cooling suspended. The fluorescence of the gas excited by the central star's radiation is frozen in its glow. Stellar nurseries, those vast clouds of gas and dust where new stars are born, are frozen in their collapse and fragmentation. The Orion Nebula, perhaps the most famous stellar nursery visible from Earth, is suspended with its pillars of gas and dust frozen mid-erosion by the stellar winds from young stars. Protostars still gathering material from their surrounding disks are frozen in their accretion. The jets of material that young stars often shoot from their poles are frozen like cosmic fountains. Protoplanetary disks where planets are forming around young stars are suspended with their particles neither colliding nor coalescing. Binary stars throughout our galaxy are frozen in their various configurations. Some are so close they share material, with gas streaming from one star to another in a frozen arc. Others are widely separated, frozen in orbits that would normally take thousands of years to complete. Some binaries include exotic objects, a normal star orbiting a black hole, with material spiraling toward the black hole frozen in its death spiral, creating a frozen accretion disk that would normally glow with X-rays from the friction of infalling matter. Neutron stars, the incredibly dense remnants of supernovae, are frozen in their usual extreme states. These objects, where a teaspoon of material would weigh as much as Mount Everest, are suspended in their rotation. Pulsars, neutron stars that emit beams of radiation like cosmic lighthouses, are frozen with their beams pointing in whatever direction they were aimed when time stopped. The magnetic fields of these neutron stars, the strongest in the universe, are frozen in their configuration. Magnetars, neutron stars with especially powerful magnetic fields, are suspended in whatever starquake or magnetic reconnection event they might have been experiencing. Black holes, those regions where gravity is so strong that not even light can escape, present a particular puzzle in our frozen universe. The event horizon, that boundary beyond which nothing can return, is frozen in place. Any material that was falling toward a black hole is suspended in its infall, frozen in the process of spaghettification, being stretched by tidal forces. The accretion disks around black holes, usually glowing brilliantly from the friction of infalling matter, are frozen in their spiral patterns. The jets that some black holes shoot from their poles, accelerating matter to near light speed, are frozen like cosmic spears extending for thousands of light years. The supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy, Sagittarius A1, is frozen with its retinue of orbiting stars suspended mid-orbit. These stars, which usually whip around the black hole at tremendous speeds, are frozen in positions that have allowed astronomers to map their orbits and confirm the black hole's existence. The black hole itself, with a mass 4 million times that of our Sun, creates a frozen whirlpool in space-time, its gravitational influence suspended but still present. As we pull back to see our entire galaxy, the Milky Way, we observe a frozen spiral of hundreds of billions of stars. The spiral arms, usually sites of active star formation triggered by density waves moving through the galaxy, are frozen in their pattern. The Perseus arm, the Sagittarius arm, the Orion spur where our Sun resides, all are suspended in their slow rotation around the galactic center. The galaxy, which usually rotates once every 250 million years or so, is perfectly still. The structure of our galaxy is revealed in this frozen moment in ways that are usually impossible to observe. The thin disk where most stars reside, the central bulge with its older stars, the spherical halo with its ancient globular clusters, all are suspended in their configuration. Dark matter, that invisible substance that makes up most of the galaxy's mass, is frozen in its distribution, its gravitational effects suspended but still shaping the visible matter's arrangement. Globular clusters, those ancient collections of hundreds of thousands of stars, are frozen in their orbits around the galaxy. Within each cluster, the stars are frozen in their complex gravitational dance, neither approaching the cluster's center nor escaping to space. These clusters, some of the oldest objects in the galaxy, are suspended in time after billions of years of evolution. Their red giants, white dwarfs, and occasional blue stragglers are all frozen in their positions. The interstellar medium throughout the galaxy is frozen in its various states. Giant molecular clouds, where stars will one day form, are suspended in their turbulent patterns. H2 regions, where hot young stars have ionized the surrounding hydrogen, glow with frozen fluorescence. Supernova remnants, the expanding shells of gas from exploded stars, are frozen in their expansion. The cosmic rays that usually zip through the galaxy at near light speed are suspended in their paths. The galaxy's magnetic field, generated by the motion of charged particles and the rotation of the galaxy itself, is frozen in its configuration. This field, usually invisible except for its effects on cosmic rays and radio waves, creates a frozen pattern throughout the galaxy. The field lines, twisted and tangled by the galaxy's rotation and the motion of gas clouds, are suspended like invisible threads weaving through space. At the edges of our galaxy, in the galactic halo, ancient stars orbit in frozen paths. These stars, some of the first to form in the galaxy, carry in their composition the history of stellar nuclear synthesis, the gradual enrichment of the universe with elements heavier than hydrogen and helium. They're frozen in their orbits, which often take them far above and below the galactic plane, Some of these stars are passing through the disk right now, frozen in their passage. Dwarf galaxies that orbit the Milky Way are frozen in their positions. The large and small Magellanic Clouds, visible from Earth's southern hemisphere, are suspended in their orbit around our galaxy. The Sagittarius dwarf spheroidal galaxy, which is currently being torn apart and absorbed by the Milky Way, is frozen in its disruption. Streams of stars pulled from these smaller galaxies are frozen in their paths, creating frozen rivers of stars flowing through space. As we consider the frozen galaxy, we begin to see patterns that are usually invisible because they play out over such vast timescales. The density waves that create spiral arms are frozen mid-propagation. The oscillation of stars above and below the galactic plane is suspended. The precession of stellar orbits around the galactic center is paused. All the complex motions that usually blur together over millions of years are frozen in a single configuration, like a snapshot of a dance that has been going on for billions of years. The concept of time itself becomes strange at these scales. In our everyday experience, time seems to flow at a constant rate. But Einstein showed us that time is relative, that it flows at different rates depending on gravity and motion. In our frozen galaxy, we see these different rates of time frozen in place. Time would normally run slightly slower near massive objects, slightly faster in empty space. These variations, usually imperceptible, are now frozen, creating a landscape of temporal gradients that will never flow. If we think about what time means at the galactic scale, we realize it's very different from human time. Stars measure time in millions and billions of years. The galaxy measures time in rotations that take hundreds of millions of years. The universe itself measures time from the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. These vast scales of time, incomprehensible to human experience, are all frozen in our thought experiment. A star that would normally live for 10 billion years is frozen at whatever point in its life it had reached. A galaxy that would normally evolve over cosmic time is suspended in one moment of its evolution. The shape of time in our frozen galaxy is revealed in ways that are usually hidden. We can see how events that seem simultaneous from one perspective are actually separated in time from another. Light from distant parts of the galaxy, frozen in its journey, shows us that what we usually see as now is actually a collection of different times. The closer parts of the galaxy from thousands of years ago, the farther parts from tens of thousands of years ago. The frozen light creates a temporal sculpture, with each distance representing a different moment in the past. Gravitational waves, those ripples in space-time predicted by Einstein and recently detected, are frozen mid-propagation through the galaxy. If any cataclysmic events, colliding black holes, neutron star mergers, supernovae, were producing gravitational waves when time stopped, those waves are suspended in their outward journey. The fabric of space-time itself, usually rippling with these waves, is frozen in whatever configuration it had, like a pond whose surface was frozen just as a stone was dropped into it. The quantum mechanical processes that underlie everything in the galaxy are frozen too. Virtual particles that usually pop into and out of existence in the quantum foam are suspended. Quantum superpositions, where particles exist in multiple states simultaneously, are frozen in their superposition. The wave functions that describe the probability of finding particles in different locations are frozen, mid-collapse. The galaxy, at its most fundamental level, is suspended between possibilities. As we contemplate this frozen galaxy, we might wonder about other galaxies, other structures in the universe beyond our own. The Andromeda Galaxy, our nearest large galactic neighbour, is frozen in its approach toward the Milky Way. In about 4 billion years, our galaxies are destined to collide and merge, but now that cosmic collision is suspended, the two galaxies frozen at a distance of 2.5 million light-years. The local group, our cluster of galaxies, is frozen in its gravitational dance. The Virgo cluster, the nearest large cluster of galaxies, is suspended with its thousands of galaxies, frozen in their complex orbital motions around the cluster's centre of mass. The cosmic web, that vast network of galaxy filaments separated by enormous voids, is frozen in its configuration. Galaxies are frozen in their positions along these filaments, neither flowing along them nor falling into the voids. The voids themselves, those vast empty spaces between filaments, are frozen in their expansion. Dark energy, that mysterious force that's accelerating the expansion of the universe, is frozen in its push. The universe itself, usually expanding so that galaxies grow farther apart, is suspended in one size, neither expanding nor contracting. This frozen cosmos reveals the universe as a structure, not just a collection of objects scattered through space, but an organized, interconnected whole. From the smallest scales to the largest, from subatomic particles to galaxy clusters, everything is connected by forces and fields and the fabric of space-time itself. The freezing of time hasn't severed these connections, but has suspended them, creating a vast three-dimensional sculpture of relationships that usually evolve through time. In this silent galaxy, in this frozen universe, your consciousness continues its journey of observation and contemplation. You are, in our imagination, the only point of change in a changeless cosmos, the only flow in a universe that has ceased flowing. This unique position gives you a perspective that no conscious being has ever had, the ability to see the universe not as it appears, filtered through time and motion and change, but as it is in a single eternal moment. The silence of this frozen galaxy is absolute, not just the absence of sound. Sound cannot propagate in the vacuum of space anyway, but the absence of all the processes that usually generate the radio waves, X-rays and other radiation that astronomers use to listen to the cosmos. Pulsars no longer pulse. Quasars no longer vary in brightness. The cosmic microwave background, that faint echo of the Big Bang, is frozen in its subtle fluctuations. The universe, usually humming with electromagnetic radiation at every frequency, is silent across the entire spectrum. Yet in this silence, in this stillness, there is a strange beauty. The galaxy, frozen mid-rotation, reveals its spiral structure in perfect clarity. Stars of different colours, blue giants, yellow stars like our sun, red dwarfs, white dwarfs, create a frozen rainbow across space. Nebulae glow with frozen fluorescence in reds and blues and greens. The galaxy, usually blurred by its own motion, and our motion through it, is sharp and clear and perfectly defined. As your consciousness contemplates this frozen galaxy, you might feel a profound sense of both insignificance and importance. Insignificance because you realize how small you are, a single consciousness in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, itself one galaxy among trillions in the observable universe. But importance too, because you are the only awareness experiencing this frozen moment, the only consciousness capable of appreciating the vast frozen beauty of the silent galaxy. In a universe where everything else has stopped, your continuing thoughts are the most dynamic, the most alive thing in existence. And now we turn inward, away from the vast frozen cosmos, away from the suspended galaxies and still stars, back to the most mysterious phenomenon in this timeless universe, your consciousness, the one thing that continues to move, to change, to experience, while everything else has paused. This is perhaps the strangest aspect of our thought experiment, the most profound paradox we've been exploring. In a universe where every atom has stopped vibrating, every photon has ceased its journey, every chemical reaction has paused mid-transformation, your thoughts continue their gentle flow from one moment to the next. What exactly is this consciousness that persists when everything else has stopped? Scientists and philosophers have debated this question for centuries, and even now, in our age of brain scans and neural mapping, consciousness remains the great mystery, the hard problem that resists easy explanation. We know that in normal time, consciousness seems to emerge from the incredibly complex interactions of billions of neurons in your brain, each one connected to thousands of others, creating a network of such vast complexity that we're only beginning to understand its basic principles. But here, in our frozen universe, those neurons are as still as everything else, their electrochemical signals paused mid-transmission, their delicate dance of activation and inhibition suspended. Yet somehow, in the beautiful impossibility of our scenario, your awareness continues. You're still able to observe, to think, to remember, to imagine. This continuation suggests something profound about the nature of consciousness, that perhaps it's not simply produced by the brain in the way that bile is produced by the liver or urine by the kidneys. Perhaps consciousness is something more fundamental, something that usually works through the brain but isn't entirely dependent on it, like a radio wave that exists independently of the radios that receive it, or like software that transcends the specific hardware it runs on. As you lie in your frozen room, observing the frozen world, you might begin to notice aspects of your own consciousness that usually escape attention. Without the constant input of new sensory information, no new sounds, no changing lights, no shifting physical sensations, your awareness might turn inward in unprecedented ways. You might become conscious of the usually unconscious processes of thought formation, watching as ideas arise from somewhere beneath the threshold of awareness, take shape in the light of consciousness, and then fade back into the depths of mind. The stream of consciousness, that term coined by William James to describe the continuous flow of thoughts and perceptions, takes on a different quality in this frozen world. Usually, that stream is fed by countless tributaries, sensory input, bodily sensations, environmental changes. Now, with all those external sources frozen, the stream must flow from internal springs alone. Memories become more vivid, perhaps, rising unbidden from the depths of your mind. Imagination becomes more active, creating worlds within worlds to populate the stillness. The boundary between thought and perception, usually so clear, might begin to blur. You might discover that without the anchor of external time, your subjective sense of duration becomes unreliable, even meaningless. Have you been observing this frozen world for minutes, hours, days, years, without clocks to mark the passage of time, without the rhythm of day and night, without the cycles of hunger and fatigue? There's no way to know. Your consciousness exists in an eternal present, a now that extends indefinitely without becoming then. This might be disconcerting at first, like losing one of your senses, but it might also be liberating, freeing you from the tyranny of time that usually drives so much of human anxiety. Memory, in this timeless state, might function differently. Usually we organize our memories temporally. This happened before that. This was yesterday. That was last year. But without time's flow to provide structure, memories might organize themselves differently, perhaps by emotional significance, by associative connections, by thematic relationships. You might find yourself able to explore your past not as a linear sequence, but as a vast landscape where you can wander at will, visiting different moments without regard for their chronological order. The memory of your first kiss might sit beside the memory of breakfast this morning, not because they happened near each other in time, but because they share some quality, a particular scent perhaps, or a similar quality of light. Your childhood might feel as present and accessible as your adulthood. The boundaries between different periods of your life might dissolve, revealing your existence not as a sequence of stages, but as a unified whole, all simultaneously present in consciousness. And what about the memories that are usually suppressed or forgotten? In this state of expanded awareness, with nowhere urgent to go and nothing pressing to do, might these hidden memories surface? Not traumatic flashbacks, we're maintaining the peaceful nature of our exploration, but simply the vast catalogue of experiences that your brain has recorded but usually doesn't bother to recall. The pattern of sunlight on your bedroom wall when you were 7, the taste of a particular candy you haven't thought about in decades, the feeling of your grandmother's hand holding yours. All of these might return with surprising clarity, as if the freezing of external time has somehow made your internal timeline more accessible. Imagination, too, might take on new dimensions in this frozen world. Without the constant competition from sensory input, your mind's ability to create internal experiences might strengthen. You might find yourself able to imagine scenes, scenarios, entire worlds with unprecedented vividness. These wouldn't be hallucinations. You'd know they were products of your imagination, but they might be more real-seeming, more detailed, more immersive than any daydream you've experienced in normal time. You might imagine yourself able to move through the frozen world, exploring beyond the confines of your room, even while your body remains still. In your mind's eye, you could walk through frozen cities, swim through suspended oceans, fly through the still air. These imaginary journeys wouldn't change anything in the frozen external world, but they might reveal things about your own consciousness, about the landscapes of your psyche, about the dreams and desires that usually hide beneath the surface of everyday awareness. The nature of thought itself might become more apparent in this timeless state. Usually, thoughts seem to simply appear in consciousness, fully formed, like actors walking onto a stage. But with the luxury of unlimited time to observe, you might catch thoughts in the process of forming, watch as vague intuitions crystallize into clear ideas, observe the usually invisible process by which the unconscious mind presents options to consciousness for consideration. You might discover that what you usually experience as thinking is really just the tip of an iceberg, the final product of vast unconscious processes that are usually hidden from view. Emotions too might reveal their true nature in this frozen moment. Without external events to trigger them, without the usual cycle of stimulus and response, emotions might arise purely from internal sources, memories, thoughts, imaginings. You might observe how emotions build from subtle beginnings, how a faint unease can grow into anxiety, or how a small pleasure can bloom into joy. You might notice how emotions colour perception, how the same frozen scene can seem beautiful or melancholic, depending on your internal state. The question of free will takes on new dimensions in this frozen universe. Usually our choices seem constrained by time. We must decide quickly, act before opportunities pass, respond to changing circumstances. But now, with unlimited time to consider every option, to explore every possibility in imagination before choosing, what does it mean to have free will? Are your thoughts freely chosen, or do they arise from prior causes that are now frozen but still determinative? Can consciousness truly be free if everything else is determined, frozen in place by the stopping of time? You might discover layers of consciousness you never knew existed. Beneath the surface level of everyday awareness, the internal monologue, the sensory perceptions, the emotional responses, there might be deeper levels, usually obscured by the noise of normal life. Perhaps there's a level of pure awareness, consciousness without content, the simple fact of being aware without being aware of anything in particular. This might be what contemplatives and meditators have been pointing to for millennia, a fundamental awareness that underlies all experience but is usually hidden by the experiences themselves. Language, that tool we use to structure thought and communicate with others, might begin to feel strange in this wordless world. With no one to talk to and no need to communicate, the internal monologue might gradually quiet. You might find yourself thinking in images, in feelings, in direct apprehensions that don't require the mediation of words. Or perhaps the opposite would happen. With no external communication possible, internal language might become richer, more poetic, more expressive, as if consciousness were telling itself an elaborate story to fill the silence. The boundary between self and other, usually so clear, might begin to blur in interesting ways. Usually you know where you end and the world begins. Your thoughts are internal, your body is the boundary, everything else is external. But in this frozen state, with your body as still as everything else, with your consciousness the only moving thing in the universe, where exactly are you? Are you in your frozen body? Are you the stream of consciousness itself? Are you perhaps something larger, an awareness that includes but transcends your individual identity? This might lead to a profound sense of connection with the frozen universe around you. Even though everything is still, even though you can't interact with anything in the usual ways, you might feel more connected to everything than ever before. Every frozen atom, every suspended star, every paused process is part of the same frozen moment that you're experiencing. In a strange way, the entire universe has become your body, all equally still, all equally present to your roving consciousness. The nature of personal identity might come into question. Usually you maintain a sense of being the same person through time by the continuity of your body, your memories, your personality. But with your body frozen and time stopped, what makes you you? Is it just the continuity of consciousness, the fact that one thought leads to another in an unbroken stream? But that stream could theoretically continue forever in this timeless state. Would you still be the same person after thinking for what would have been years or centuries in normal time? You might begin to experience what philosophers call the view from nowhere, a perspective that isn't tied to any particular location or moment, but sees everything from an objective standpoint. Your consciousness, freed from the usual constraints of being located in a particular body at a particular time, might expand to encompass multiple perspectives simultaneously. You could, in imagination at least, see your frozen room from outside while also being inside it, experience the Earth from space while also being on its surface, comprehend the galaxy as a whole while also being aware of individual stars. This expansion of perspective might bring insights about the nature of existence itself. The frozen universe around you is like a three-dimensional cross-section of four-dimensional space-time, a slice through the loaf of existence that reveals its structure in a way that's usually impossible to perceive. You can see how everything is interconnected, how each part relates to every other part, how the whole forms a unified system temporarily paused in its operation. Creativity might flourish in this timeless state, without deadlines, without the pressure to produce, without the fear of judgment. Your creative faculties might open in new ways. You could compose symphonies in your mind, write novels in your imagination, paint masterpieces in your mind's eye. These creations would exist only in consciousness, of course, unable to be expressed in the frozen external world, but they would be no less real for being purely mental. In fact, freed from the constraints of physical media, they might achieve a perfection that would be impossible in the regular world. The question of meaning and purpose takes on new significance when time has stopped. Usually meaning seems to come from our actions in the world, from what we do and create and how we affect others. But when action is impossible, when you can't affect anything external, where does meaning come from? Perhaps you'd discover that meaning is something consciousness creates internally, independent of external effects. The meaning would be in the experience itself, in the quality of awareness, in the depth of understanding, rather than in any external achievement. You might develop a different relationship with desire and aversion. Usually we want things to change. We desire certain outcomes and want to avoid others, but in a frozen world where change is impossible, desire and aversion might gradually fade, replaced by a simple acceptance of what is. This wouldn't be resignation or defeat, but a profound peace, an alignment with reality as it presents itself. The Buddhist concept of nirvana, sometimes described as the extinguishing of desire, might become not just a philosophical idea but a lived experience. The nature of suffering and happiness might be revealed in new ways. Without external circumstances changing to cause pleasure or pain, any suffering or happiness you experience would clearly be coming from your own mental processes. You might observe how certain thoughts lead to suffering while others lead to peace, how some mental states are inherently pleasant, while others are inherently unpleasant. This direct observation of the mechanics of suffering and happiness, without the usual confusion of external causes, might lead to profound insights about the nature of human experience. As your consciousness continues its journey through this frozen universe, you might begin to wonder about other consciousnesses. Are you truly the only awareness that continues while everything else has stopped? What about other people, frozen in their bodies? Do they have some form of consciousness that continues but can't be expressed? What about animals, whose consciousness we already barely understand? What about the possibility of cosmic consciousness, some form of awareness at scales we can't normally perceive? These questions can't be answered definitively in our thought experiment, but contemplating them might lead to a sense of profound mystery about consciousness itself. The fact that you can even ask these questions, that you can wonder about the experience of others, that you can imagine what it might be like to be a bat or a whale or another person, reveals something remarkable about consciousness, its ability to transcend its own boundaries, at least in imagination. The relationship between consciousness and time becomes increasingly puzzling the more you contemplate it. Does consciousness create time, or does time create consciousness? In normal experience, they seem inseparable. Consciousness always involves change, and change requires time. But here you are, consciousness continuing while time has stopped, suggesting that perhaps consciousness is more fundamental than time, or at least independent of it in ways we don't usually realize. You might begin to experience what mystics have called the eternal now, not a moment that lasts forever, but a present that somehow contains all of time. Past, present, and future might cease to be separate categories and become simply different aspects of a single, unified existence. The linear progression from birth to death that usually defines human life might be revealed as just one way of organizing experience, no more fundamental than organizing it by emotional significance or thematic connection, or any other principle. As you explore the depths of your own consciousness, you might encounter what Jung called the collective unconscious, patterns, symbols, and archetypes that seem to transcend individual experience. These might arise as spontaneous visions, as sudden understandings, as feelings of connection to something larger than yourself. The hero's journey, the great mother, the wise old man, the shadow. These universal patterns might present themselves to your awareness, suggesting that consciousness has structures and patterns that transcend individual minds. The boundary between conscious and unconscious might become more permeable. Usually most of our mental processing happens below the threshold of awareness. We're not conscious of how we recognize faces, how we understand language, how we maintain our balance. But in this state of expanded awareness, with nothing else to attend to, you might become conscious of processes that are usually automatic. You might observe the usually invisible machinery of perception and cognition. Watch the unconscious mind at work. See how the seamless experience of consciousness is actually constructed from countless separate processes. This increased awareness of usually unconscious processes might extend to bodily awareness as well. Even though your body is frozen, you might become aware of aspects of embodiment that usually escape notice. The subtle sense of inhabiting a body, the background feeling of being physically present, the way consciousness seems centered behind your eyes, all of these might become objects of contemplation. You might discover that what you usually think of as you is actually a construction, a center of narrative gravity created by consciousness to organize experience. The phenomenon of time perception might reveal itself to be even stranger than you initially thought. Without external time to anchor it, your subjective sense of duration might become completely fluid. A single thought might seem to last eons, or vast stretches of contemplation might seem to pass in an instant. You might experience time not as a linear progression, but as a dimension. You can move through freely in consciousness, revisiting the past, imagining the future, dwelling in an extended present. This fluidity of subjective time might allow you to experience your entire life simultaneously, not as a sequence of events, but as a unified whole, all present at once in consciousness. Your childhood self, your current self, your imagined future self might all be equally present, equally real in awareness. The story of your life, usually experienced as a narrative unfolding through time, might be revealed as a complete work that can be apprehended all at once, like viewing a painting rather than reading a book. As your consciousness continues its solitary journey through this frozen universe, observing the stillness of atoms and the silence of stars, a profound question begins to form in the depths of your contemplation. What does this impossible scenario, this thought experiment of stopped time and continuing consciousness, reveal about the nature of our actual lives lived in the flowing river of normal time? What insights might we carry back from this imaginary pause into the rushing current of our everyday existence? The first and perhaps most obvious insight is about the preciousness of change itself. In our normal lives, we often resist change, seeking stability, routine, the comfort of the familiar. We build habits to minimize the need for conscious decision-making, create routines that carry us through our days with minimal effort, establish patterns that give structure and predictability to our lives. But here, in this frozen world where change is impossible, you might discover a profound appreciation for the simple fact that things can change, that moments can flow into other moments, that the future can be different from the past. Every tiny change that we usually take for granted, the movement of breath in and out of our lungs, the beating of our hearts, the gradual shift of shadows as the sun moves across the sky, is revealed as a small miracle. The ability to take action, to affect the world, to make choices that have consequences, is shown to be not a burden, but a gift. Even the changes we usually resist, aging, loss, the ending of good things, might be seen differently from this frozen perspective, as necessary parts of the flow that makes life possible. In this timeless state, you might also discover something profound about presence and attention. Usually our consciousness is pulled in many directions at once, planning for the future, remembering the past, attending to multiple streams of input, juggling various concerns and responsibilities. But here, with nowhere to go and nothing urgent to do, you can give complete attention to whatever you choose to observe. A single dust mote becomes a universe of detail. A frozen expression on someone's face reveals layers of emotion usually too fleeting to perceive. The texture of ordinary objects, the grain of wood, the weave of fabric, the play of light on water becomes endlessly fascinating. This quality of deep attention, of complete presence, is something that contemplatives and artists have always sought, but it usually requires tremendous effort to achieve even briefly. In our frozen world, it becomes the natural state, the only option, and in experiencing it, you might realize how much of life's richness we usually miss in our rush from one moment to the next, how much beauty and complexity surrounds us that we never take time to truly see. The frozen world also offers a unique perspective on human relationships and connections. Those people frozen around you, family, friends, strangers on the street, are suspended in whatever they were doing, thinking, feeling when time stopped. Looking at them, really seeing them in their frozen moments, you might feel a profound sense of compassion and connection. Each person is caught in their own story, their own struggles and joys, their own journey through life. The businessman rushing to his meeting, the child playing in the park, the elderly couple holding hands, each is revealed as a complete universe of experience temporarily paused. This might lead to a deeper understanding of our fundamental interconnectedness. In normal time, we often feel separate, isolated in our individual experiences, struggling to truly understand or connect with others. But seeing everyone frozen in the same moment, all equally suspended, all part of the same paused instant, might reveal that we're all participants in the same cosmic moment, all expressions of the same underlying reality, all temporary arrangements of matter and energy that have briefly achieved consciousness. The question of what really matters in life takes on new dimensions in this frozen state. Usually we're driven by various goals and desires, success, achievement, accumulation, status. But when action is impossible, when you can't achieve anything, or accumulate anything or improve your status, what remains? Perhaps you discover that what really matters is the quality of consciousness itself, the depth of awareness, the richness of experience, the capacity for wonder and appreciation. These qualities don't depend on external achievement but on internal development, on the cultivation of consciousness itself. You might also discover something about the nature of happiness and fulfillment. In normal life, we often think happiness comes from getting what we want, from circumstances aligning with our desires. But in this frozen world where circumstances can't change, any happiness or peace you experience must come from within, from your relationship with what is rather than from changing what is. This might reveal that true contentment is less about external conditions and more about internal states, less about what happens to us, and more about how we relate to what happens. The frozen world might also offer insights into the nature of problems and solutions. Every problem visible in the frozen world, conflicts between people, environmental destruction, inequality, suffering, is suspended mid-process. You can see the exact configuration of forces and circumstances that create these problems, frozen like a three-dimensional diagram. This perspective might reveal that many problems that seem intractable in the flow of time are actually the result of patterns that could be changed if we could step back and see them clearly. But you'd also see that you, alone with your continuing consciousness, can't solve any of these problems. You can understand them, analyze them, imagine solutions, but you can't implement anything. This might lead to a profound humility about the limitations of individual consciousness and the necessity of collective action. Real change in the world requires not just understanding, but the coordinated action of many consciousnesses working together through time. The experience of unlimited time for contemplation might also reveal something about the nature of wisdom. Usually, wisdom is associated with age, with the accumulation of experiences over time, but in this frozen state you have unlimited time to think but no new experiences to process. You might discover that wisdom isn't just about having many experiences, but about deeply understanding the experiences you've had, about seeing the patterns and connections that were always there but required time and attention to perceive. You might find yourself able to revisit past decisions with perfect clarity, seeing not just what you chose but all the factors that influenced your choice, all the paths not taken, all the consequences that followed. This wouldn't necessarily lead to regret. In a frozen world, regret is pointless since nothing can be changed, but to understanding, to a clear seeing of how life unfolds through the interplay of choice and circumstance, intention and accident, wisdom and folly. The frozen world might also offer a unique perspective on mortality and the finite nature of human life. Usually death is the ultimate deadline, the final boundary that gives urgency and meaning to our limited time. But in this frozen state, death is suspended like everything else. Those who are dying when time stopped are frozen in their final moments but will never complete their journey. This might seem like a kind of immortality, but you'd quickly realize it's not the immortality anyone would choose, not an extension of life, but a suspension of it. This might lead to the insight that death is not the opposite of life but an essential part of it. Without the possibility of ending, there can be no completion, no fulfillment, no meaning to the journey. The fact that our lives are finite, that our time is limited, is what gives weight and significance to our choices, what makes each moment precious. In a universe of unlimited frozen time, you might find yourself longing for the simple ability to complete something, to finish a story, to reach an ending. The relationship between individual consciousness and the larger cosmos might become clearer in this frozen state. Usually we feel small and insignificant compared to the vast universe, brief flickers of awareness in an immense and largely unconscious cosmos. But as the only continuing consciousness in a frozen universe, you become, in a sense, the universe's only way of experiencing itself. Your awareness, however limited and localized, is the only point where the cosmos achieves self-reflection, where existence becomes aware of itself. This might lead to a sense of profound responsibility, not the burden of having to fix everything or save everyone, which is clearly impossible, but the responsibility of consciousness itself, of being aware, of witnessing, of appreciating the extraordinary fact of existence. In normal time, this responsibility is shared among billions of conscious beings. In the frozen world, it rests entirely on you, revealing both the weight and the privilege of awareness. You might also discover something about the nature of meaning and purpose. In normal life, we often struggle to find meaning, to understand our purpose, to figure out why we're here and what we're supposed to do. But in the frozen world, with no possibility of doing anything, you might discover that meaning doesn't require doing. Simply being aware, simply witnessing the extraordinary complexity and beauty of existence might be meaning enough. The universe has arranged matter and energy in such a way that it can observe itself, can appreciate its own beauty, can wonder at its own mystery. That alone might be purpose enough. The frozen world might also reveal the arbitrary nature of many of the boundaries and categories we use to organize experience. The boundary between self and other, between mind and matter, between life and non-life. All of these might seem less solid, more like useful conventions than fundamental divisions. Everything in the frozen universe is made of the same basic particles, organized in different patterns, temporarily manifesting different properties. Your consciousness, seemingly so different from the frozen matter around you, might be revealed as simply another pattern, another way matter and energy can be organized. This dissolution of boundaries might extend to the categories we use to organize human life: nations, races, religions, ideologies. In the frozen world, you can see that these are all just patterns of thought and behavior, temporarily adopted by groups of conscious beings, no more fundamental than the clothes people happen to be wearing when time stopped. This doesn't make them unimportant. They clearly shape human experience in profound ways, but it might reveal them as constructs rather than givens, as choices rather than necessities. The experience of being the only conscious observer in a frozen universe might also offer insights into loneliness and connection. At first, the isolation might seem absolute. You are literally the only aware being in existence, unable to communicate with anyone, unable to share your experience. But as you continue to observe and contemplate, you might discover a different kind of connection. Not the connection of communication, but the connection of shared existence, of being part of the same frozen moment as everyone and everything else. You might realize that even in normal time, we're all essentially alone in our consciousness, unable to directly share our subjective experience with others. Language, gesture, art. These are all attempts to bridge the gap between consciousnesses, to share what can't be directly transmitted. The frozen world simply makes explicit what was always true. We're alone in our awareness, but connected in our existence, separate in our subjectivity, but united in our participation in the same reality. The question of free will versus determinism might take on new dimensions in the frozen world. Looking at the frozen tableau of existence, you can see how everything is connected, how each state leads, inevitably to the next, how the present moment is the product of all the moments that came before. This might suggest a deterministic universe where free will is an illusion, but your own continuing consciousness, your ability to think different thoughts, and imagine different possibilities even in this frozen world, suggest that something like free will exists, at least in the realm of consciousness. Perhaps the frozen world reveals that free will and determinism aren't opposites, but complementary aspects of reality. The physical world might unfold according to deterministic laws, but consciousness might introduce something genuinely new, genuinely creative, genuinely free. Or perhaps freedom and determinism are both concepts that only make sense within time, and in stepping outside time's flow, you've stepped outside the framework in which that debate has meaning. As you contemplate these profound questions in your frozen universe, you might begin to feel a strange mixture of gratitude and longing. Gratitude for this unique perspective, for the opportunity to see existence from outside time's flow, to contemplate the deepest questions without distraction or urgency, but also longing for the simple pleasures of change, for the ability to act and affect and connect, for the messy vitality of life in time. This might lead to the final insight, that the flowing of time, with all its difficulties and limitations, is not a prison but a gift. The ability to change, to grow, to learn, to connect with others, to make mistakes and recover from them, to have beginnings and endings. All of this is what makes life possible and meaningful. The frozen world, for all its peaceful contemplation and profound insights, is ultimately static, sterile, incomplete. It's a photograph of life, not life itself. And now, after all this contemplation, after all this observation of a universe held in perfect stillness, after all this exploration of consciousness freed from time's usual constraints, we come to the moment that must eventually arrive, even in our imagination, the moment when time begins again. Not with a sudden jolt or a dramatic restart, but with the gentlest of resumptions, like a held breath finally, softly released, like a paused piece of music continuing from exactly where it stopped, like a river that had been frozen suddenly remembering how to flow. How would you first notice it? Perhaps it would be the smallest of movements, a dust mote that had been suspended in that shaft of light suddenly continuing its lazy descent. Or maybe it would be a sound, the tick of a clock completing the beat it had started when time froze, the hum of electricity returning to the walls, the distant whisper of wind outside your window. Or it might be something you feel rather than see or hear, the subtle sensation of your heart completing its interrupted beat, your lungs finishing the breath they had begun, the barely perceptible shift of blood through your veins. The resumption would be so smooth, so continuous with the moment before the pause, that if you hadn't been conscious during the freeze, you would never know it had happened. This is one of the beautiful paradoxes of our thought experiment. For everyone and everything else in the universe, no time has passed at all. The businessman frozen mid-stride completes his step without any awareness of the pause. The child frozen mid-laugh continues laughing, the sound picking up exactly where it left off. The waves frozen mid-crash complete their breaking on the shore. For the entire universe except your consciousness, it's as if the pause never occurred. But for you, carrying the memory of that timeless time, the experience of unlimited contemplation in a frozen world, everything has changed, even though nothing has changed. You've seen the universe from a perspective no one has ever had, understood things about time and consciousness and existence that can only be glimpsed from outside time's normal flow. You carry within your awareness an experience that technically never happened, a memory of events that occurred in no time, a knowledge gained in a moment that wasn't a moment. As the world begins to move again, you might feel a strange disorientation. After the perfect stillness, even the smallest movements seem significant. The curtain that had been frozen mid-flutter completes its sway, and this simple motion seems like a miracle. The clock hand that had been suspended between seconds clicks forward, and this tiny progression feels momentous. Everything that you had observed in frozen detail, every dust mote, every shadow, every reflection, suddenly returns to its usual blur of motion, and you realize how much you normally miss, how much passes by too quickly to truly see. The sounds of the world returning might be overwhelming at first. After the absolute silence of the frozen universe, even quiet sounds seem loud. The gentle hum of your refrigerator, the soft whisper of air through vents, the distant murmur of traffic, all of these create a symphony of continuation, a celebration of process and change. You might find yourself listening with new attention, hearing layers of sound you never noticed before, appreciating the complex acoustic texture of ordinary life. Your body, returning to its normal processes, might feel strange at first. The sensation of breathing, usually so automatic that you don't notice it, might feel profound. The air moving in and out, the chest rising and falling, the whole complex process of gas exchange that keeps consciousness anchored to physical form. Your heartbeat, usually just background rhythm, might feel like a drum announcing your return to the world of change. Every small movement, turning your head, shifting your position, blinking your eyes, might carry a weight of significance it never had before. As you watch the world return to its normal flow, you might notice things that are usually invisible because they happen too slowly or too quickly. The way shadows creep across the floor as the sun moves, the way plants subtly adjust their leaves to track the light, the way people's expressions constantly shift even when they think they're holding still. The frozen world had shown you the universe in perfect stillness. Now the moving world reveals itself as a constant dance of change, every atom in motion, every moment flowing into the next. The people around you, resuming their activities without any awareness of the pause, might seem both familiar and strange. You know something profound about them now. You've seen them frozen in single moments, observed the exact configuration of their existence at one precise instant. But they don't know this, can't share this experience, continue their lives as if nothing has happened. You might feel a strange tenderness toward them, a protective affection for these fellow travelers who don't know they've been traveling, who don't know they were paused. This might lead to a peculiar kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of the frozen world where you were the only consciousness, but the loneliness of carrying an experience that can't be shared, of knowing something that no one else knows, of having seen something that no one else has seen. How could you possibly explain that time stopped for everything except your thoughts? How could you convey the insights gained from unlimited contemplation in a timeless moment? The experience might become like a dream, vivid and meaningful to you, but impossible to fully communicate to others. Yet this inability to share the experience might not be entirely negative. Some insights, some understandings, can't be transmitted through words but must be lived, embodied, expressed through how you engage with the world rather than what you say about it. The deep appreciation for change, the profound presence with each moment, the understanding of consciousness's mysterious nature, these might manifest not as things you tell others, but as qualities of your being, subtle changes in how you move through the world. As minutes turn to hours and hours turn to days, you might find yourself occasionally wondering if the freeze really happened, or if it was the strangest of dreams, the most vivid of imaginations. The world continues its normal course. The sun rises and sets, people go about their business, the news reports the same kinds of events it always has. There's no evidence of the pause, no proof that time stopped. The only testimony is your memory, your consciousness of having been conscious when nothing else was. But whether it really happened or not might not be the important question. The insights remain valid, the perspectives remain valuable, the understanding remains real. The thought experiment has served its purpose, to step outside the normal flow of experience and see it from a different angle, to question assumptions about time and consciousness that usually go unexamined, to appreciate aspects of existence that are usually taken for granted. You might find that your relationship with time has fundamentally changed. Where once you might have felt rushed, pressured by deadlines and schedules, you now carry within you the memory of unlimited time, of being able to contemplate without urgency. This doesn't make you careless about time. If anything, you might value it more, knowing how precious change and flow really are. But it might free you from the anxiety that often accompanies time's passage. You know, in the depths of your being, that consciousness can expand to fill whatever time is available, that a moment fully experienced can contain eternity. Your perception of the present moment might be enriched by your experience of the frozen world. You've seen how much exists in each instant, the complex configuration of atoms and forces, the intricate patterns of light and shadow, the deep structure of reality usually hidden by constant change. Now, even as moments flow past, you might be able to perceive some of this richness, to see the depth in each passing instant, to appreciate the fullness of now even as it constantly becomes then. The question that started our journey, what if time stopped for everything except your thoughts, might transform into other questions. What is the relationship between consciousness and time? Can awareness exist independently of physical processes? What does it mean to be conscious in a universe of constant change? These questions don't have easy answers, but having lived through our thought experiment, even in imagination, you're better equipped to explore them. You might also find that your sense of connection to the cosmos has deepened. You've seen the universe frozen, observed it as a single, unified system temporarily paused. You've experienced yourself as the only point of consciousness in an otherwise still cosmos, felt the weight and wonder of being the universe's way of observing itself. This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish your individual life, but places it in a larger context, reveals it as part of something vast and beautiful and mysterious. The ordinary world, which might once have seemed mundane or predictable, now reveals itself as extraordinary. Every moment is a miracle of coordinated change, billions of atoms moving in patterns that create everything from stones to stars to consciousness itself. Every person you meet is a universe of experience, a unique perspective on existence, a fellow traveller through the mystery of time. Every day is a gift of change and possibility, a chance to participate in the ongoing creation of reality. As days turn to weeks, and weeks turn to months, the memory of the frozen world might fade in its vividness but deepen in its influence. Like a dream that changes you even though you can't quite remember all its details, the experience of stopped time continues to work within you, subtly altering how you perceive and engage with the world. You might find yourself more present, more patient, more appreciative of the simple fact that things can happen, that time can pass, that change is possible. You might develop a different relationship with problems and challenges. Having seen everything frozen, unable to change or resolve, you might appreciate the ability to take action, to make a difference, to contribute to the flow of cause and effect. Problems that once seemed overwhelming might seem more manageable when you remember that at least they can be addressed, at least change is possible, at least time is flowing and carrying everything toward new configurations. The fear of death, that ultimate ending that haunts human consciousness, might be transformed by your experience. You've experienced a kind of deathlessness in the frozen world, unlimited time for consciousness without the possibility of ending, and found it not liberating but limiting. Death, you might now understand, is not the enemy of the life but its necessary companion, the boundary that gives shape to existence, the ending that makes beginnings possible. Without the possibility of death there can be no life, just as without the flow of time there can be no change. Your understanding of consciousness itself has been deepened by the experience. You've explored what it might mean for awareness to exist independently of its usual physical substrate, contemplated the relationship between subjective experience and objective reality, witnessed the mysteries of memory and imagination and thought from a unique perspective. These explorations don't provide final answers. Consciousness remains the great mystery, but they enrich your appreciation of the miracle of awareness, the wonder of being able to wonder. As you continue your journey through flowing time, carrying within you the memory of time stopped, you might occasionally pause, not a stopping of time but a stopping within time, to appreciate the extraordinary nature of ordinary existence. The simple act of making a cup of tea becomes a celebration of process, water heating, steam rising, leaves steeping, flavors mingling. A conversation with a friend becomes a miracle of connection, thoughts forming, words flowing, meanings exchanged, understanding deepened. The natural world, always beautiful, might seem even more wondrous when you remember seeing it frozen. A tree swaying in the wind is not just moving but dancing, celebrating its ability to respond to forces, to bend without breaking, to be part of the world's constant conversation of action and reaction. Birds in flight are not just travelling, but performing the miracle of controlled falling, constantly adjusting to invisible currents, navigating through 3 dimensions with a grace that would be impossible in a frozen world. Human creativity and achievement might inspire new appreciation. Every piece of music is a sculpture in time, impossible, without duration, without the flow from note to note. Every story is a journey through imagined time, creating worlds that exist in the space between beginning and ending. Every painting, though static, captures a moment from the river of time, freezes it not in the way our thought experiment imagined, but in a way that can be shared, communicated, experienced by others. Science and technology, those great human projects of understanding and shaping reality, might seem even more remarkable. They depend entirely on time's flow, on being able to perform experiments, observe results, build on previous knowledge. The frozen world had perfect information about one moment, but no ability to learn, to discover, to create new knowledge. The flowing world, for all its confusion and complexity, allows for growth, learning, the gradual expansion of understanding. Relationships, those connections between consciousnesses that give so much meaning to human life, are revealed as processes that unfold through time. Love is not a static state, but a dynamic interaction, constantly renewed through small gestures, shared experiences, mutual growth. Friendship is not a fixed condition, but an ongoing creation, built through conversations and silences, presence and absence, the whole complex dance of human connection that requires time to unfold. Even problems and suffering, those aspects of existence we might wish to freeze out of existence, are shown to have their place in the flowing world. They create the contrast that makes joy meaningful, the challenges that drive growth, the shared difficulties that bond people together. A world without problems wouldn't be paradise, but paralysis, not perfection, but petrification. The frozen world had no suffering, but it also had no possibility of healing, no chance for growth, no opportunity for triumph over adversity. As our journey through this thought experiment comes to its close, we return to where we began, lying in bed, perhaps late at night or in the early morning hours, contemplating the nature of time and consciousness. But we return changed by our imaginative journey, enriched by our exploration of impossible possibilities. We've travelled to a place that doesn't exist, experienced something that can't happen, and yet we've learned something real about the nature of existence. The clock beside your bed continues its steady ticking, marking moments that pass and will never come again. Your breath continues its rhythm, in and out, connecting you to the world through the constant exchange of gases. Your thoughts continue their flow, one leading to another in the mysterious process we call consciousness. Everything continues, and in that continuation is both the ordinary miracle of existence and the profound mystery of time. What if time stopped for everything except your thoughts? We've explored this question not to find a definitive answer, but to illuminate the questions hidden within the question. What is time? What is consciousness? What is the relationship between subjective experience and objective reality? How does change relate to identity? What makes life meaningful? These are not questions with easy answers, perhaps not questions with any final answers at all, but in exploring them, even through an impossible thought experiment, we deepen our appreciation for the mystery and wonder of existence. The universe continues its expansion, galaxies rushing apart, stars being born and dying, planets spinning in their orbits. Earth continues its journey around the sun, carrying us through seasons of warmth and cold, light and darkness. Life continues its evolution, its constant experimentation with form and function, its endless creativity in the face of entropy. And consciousness, your consciousness, my consciousness, the shared miracle of awareness, continues its exploration of what it means to exist, to experience, to be. In the end, our thought experiment returns us to the beginning with new eyes. We see the flowing of time not as a given but as a gift. We see consciousness not as a simple fact but as a profound mystery. We see the ordinary world as extraordinary, the mundane as miraculous, the everyday as filled with wonder. And perhaps, in some small way, we carry forward the peace of that imagined pause, the depth of that unlimited contemplation, the insights of that impossible experience. Time continues and we continue with it, but we are not the same. We have been to the place where time stops and returned to tell the tale. Not a tale of what happened, for nothing happened, but a tale of what it means for things to happen, for time to flow, for consciousness to witness the unfolding of existence. And in the telling and the listening, in the imagining and the contemplating, we participate in the greatest mystery of all, the fact that the universe has arranged itself in such a way that it can wonder about itself, can imagine itself differently, can ask, what if, and follow that question into the deepest mysteries of existence. The night continues its journey toward dawn, or the day continues its journey toward dusk. Your journey through time continues, carrying you toward tomorrow and all the tomorrows that follow. But for this moment, this real moment, not a frozen one, you can rest in the simple awareness of being, of thinking, of experiencing. You can appreciate the gentle impossibility of consciousness, the flowing mystery of time, the quiet wonder of existing in a universe that allows for both stability and change, both pattern and surprise, both the predictable and the genuinely new. And as you drift towards sleep, that daily journey into a different kind of timelessness, you might carry with you the peace of the frozen world and the vitality of the flowing one, the stillness of perfect pause and the energy of constant change. In your dreams, you might find yourself again in that timeless place, observing the frozen universe, with unfrozen thoughts. Or you might dream of new impossibilities, explore new paradoxes, ask new questions that have no answers but are worth asking anyway. For now, though, you are here, in this moment that is moving into the next moment, in this body that is breathing and changing, in this consciousness that is witnessing and wondering. Time has not stopped, and likely never will, at least not in the way we imagined. But in imagining it, in exploring the impossible, we have touched something true about the nature of existence, something that can't quite be put into words but can be felt, experienced, lived. The universe continues its ancient dance, and you are part of it. Not just a passenger, but a participant. Not just an observer, but an integral part of the observation. Your consciousness, mysterious and miraculous, continues its journey through time, creating meaning and memory, understanding and wonder, question after question after question. And in the asking, in the wondering, in the imagining of impossible possibilities, something beautiful happens. The universe becomes aware of itself, appreciates itself, wonders at itself through you. What if time stopped for everything except your thoughts? Now you know, not the answer, but the depth of the question, the richness of the exploration, the wonder of wondering, and that knowledge, that experience, that journey through imagined impossibility becomes part of your story, part of your consciousness, part of the ever-flowing river of time that carries us all toward tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, world without end, until time itself finally stops. Not in the way we imagined, but in whatever way it actually will, if it ever does, in the fullness of time that continues for now to flow.